Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Hinata was Hawk's child. Here is short summary, an alternate universe where the characters of Haikyuu and MHA coexist together. While things with Humarise worked out in one universe, it didn't in this one. After Humarise's successful attack on the world, everywhere you looked you found panic and chaos, but Humarise had a plan far before they placed their bombs. Humarise gathered people from all over Europe and placed them in a secure dome to finally create their so-called perfect society. How did they do that? After all, people surely wouldn't agree with their methods, not to mention that few would even consider getting rid of their quirks. But people can't miss what they no longer remember they had. In this world, a certain ginger-haired hero in training by the name of Crow suddenly finds himself stranded in the middle of a Humarise society with no access to his quirk. With no clear plan, he does his best to try and gather intel to stop this war while finding a way back to his family. But what will happen when he stumbles across a group of volleyball players, and they end up entangled in his mission? But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Crow. Hinata heard someone yell out his name just as he crashed into the villain in front of him. Immediately he realized his mistake. The Humarise follower had his hand extended and a bright light left his palm, wrapping everything around him in a bright blur, including himself. "Don't run, you coward." Hinata's words were cut short when he felt the ground beneath him vanish. His head started spinning and his sense of direction was all over the place. The closest thing to a solid surface was the guy who he was now holding on to for dear life. "Don't touch me, you cursed boy." The guy shoved his hand into Hinata's face, blocking his sight as he tried to get him out of him. Although Hinata couldn't see, he could feel himself moving as they both spun around in whatever weird light portal they were in. And to make matters worse, the light was getting hotter and he felt his wings turning to crisps. Hinata felt a sharp pain from his stomach, and he quickly realized that the guy must have kicked him, trying to get him to let go. "Hey," he yelled, "let me go." Each word the guy said was followed by another kick, and against his better judgment Hinata lost his grip and he spiraled away. He felt a sharp pain on his back as he broke out of whatever place he was in and plummeted down as gravity took hold again. He tried to look around, but his vision was filled with dancing black spots. Hinata let out a painful grunt as he landed roughly on a surface and rolled along because of the momentum. He felt his shoulder crash into something and finally stopped rolling, but it also gave him a new bruise. Cough cough. "Damn it," Hinata cursed. Those kicks along with the rough landing must have done a decent amount of damage to his ribs, but nothing he couldn't handle. He shook his head and blinked a couple of times before his vision went back to normal and looked around. The first thing he noticed was that it was night time, which doesn't make sense since the sun had just barely started going down a few minutes ago. "What?" he whispered. He got up on his feet and scanned his surroundings. It looked like he was on the rooftop of a building. Normally this wouldn't be odd considering that many cities throughout the world had been deserted because of the Humarise bombs. The bombs caused everyone exposed to it to lose control of their quirk, which left hundreds of cities destroyed and even more dead. Hinata remembers the way the city looked from above whenever he was patrolling the area, and although he hated to admit it, he found them kind of peaceful. Sure, they were mostly decayed and practically crumbling to the ground, but it was quiet. That's exactly what was wrong with the building Hinata was currently in. There was noise everywhere, not to mention that the rooftop appeared to be in one shape and well made. Hinata quickly made his way towards the edge to look around, and when he did his eyes went wide. Below the building, the streets were filled with people. Normal, happy people. It looked like your average city. Hinata was only 11 when Humarise appeared, but he still remembers how his home looked. The people, the sound, the smells, it was all there. And Hinata had a hard time believing it. He stood there gaping at the sight before him, when he realized something. The people were all normal. He had already established that, but after further inspection he noticed they weren't his normal. They looked quirkless. None of them had any quirks. No colorful hair, no mutations, nothing. He beeped in a quick breath and shuddered as he realized where he was. He was in Humarise territory. Around 5 years ago, after Humarise's successful bombing across the world, society crumbled down. People were terrified, laws abandoned, and it was then that Humarise saw the best way to attack. Humarise slowly started rounding people up around Europe, whether it was by force or willingly isn't known. Then the heroes found something. A huge dome in northern Europe. At first they thought it was Humarise's base and they tried their best to break in, but no matter how much they tried it seemed impossible. Many speculated that it was somehow enhanced with some type of quirk. Typical, since Humarise sees all quirks as disgusting things until they are useful to them. All of that happened during the first year, but it wasn't until the heroes managed to get some information out of some Humarise spy did they figure out that the dome wasn't Humarise's base. Humarise's leader, known as Fleck Turn, has this wild dream of creating a society with no quirks. And it looks like he succeeded. All the people he rounded up from Europe were somehow living inside the dome. And to make it all worse, their quirks have been dormant. The spy they caught seemed way too happy to show off what his leader was able to pull off. Finally, the perfect people, in a perfect society, have risen from the ashes from this cursed plague. He announced, thrilled to have an audience. That won't work, interrupted pro-hero Eraserhead. Quirks are a part of a person's identity. You can't possibly just expect them to follow along with whatever you tell them to do when you are taking away what's rightfully theirs. The spy started chuckling, a low, hollow sound as he said his last words. People can't miss what they no longer remember they had. Everyone in the room tensed at his words when he suddenly jerked his head up violently, causing the heroes to get ready for whatever was coming. But when the spy looked down again, all they saw were the white iris in his eyes before he crumbled to the ground. Dead. Hinata had a hard time believing it at first when his dad told him, but looking at all the people here, smiling, unbothered, Hinata understood. Nobody here was aware of the war, or of their lost quirks, or that they were being ruled by a crazy and delusional man. Or that everything they knew was a lie. The reality of the situation he was in came crashing down. He was alone, with no backup, lost and in enemy territory. Did they know he was here? And if they did, they would probably be looking for him and either lock him up or kill him. His wings were gone, burned to a crisp, he barely had 3 feathers left. His communication device had no signal and his dad was probably freaking out right this second. No, stop. Hinata forced himself to take a deep breath. He needs to calm down. Okay, don't jump to conclusions. If Humarise was still unaware of his surprise visit, he needed to keep it that way. He looked down at his hero outfit, which looked just like his dad's except it was mostly black to match his dark wings. Although the HSPC has been pretty strict about making sure Hinata was not recognized or known by the enemy, there was still the chance that word about Hawk's son could have reached the Humarise. So with that in mind, Hinata would have to find something else to wear. Hinata looked back at the people in the streets. It would probably be best to wait a while to avoid being spotted. People should already be on their way home, since it was getting late. Around an hour later, the streets were mostly clear except for a few drunks and homeless. Hinata gave himself an extra minute to calm down before he made his way down the building and into the streets. Even though there weren't many people, Hinata still stuck to the shadows to avoid being seen. Okay, time to act unheroically. He looked around and found a drunk man walking around with a navy jacket. Perfect. He quickly looked behind him just to be safe and got ready to wield his feathers. His response was nothing. He almost tripped at the realization. He tried again, but the tingling sensation he normally feels was gone. He silently slipped into a near alley and pressed his back against the wall. He could still feel a few feathers on his back, barely 3, but they were still there, so why couldn't he use them? His thoughts went back to all the people he had seen on the streets. Could it be that he was now quirkless? No, that can't be it. Hinata never had any issues with quirkless people, and never will, but thinking about the fact that he could be quirkless left him feeling raw. He shuddered. Had the guy he was fighting managed to slip in a drug into his system? If so, why hadn't he noticed? No, he would have noticed, so there had to be a different reason why he was just like everyone else in this dome. Wait, the dome. He looked up. He was greeted by the dark night and the faint light of the moon. There were no stars. Just another reminder of where he was. But that's when he realized the air. The dome needed air so that everyone could still breathe, so what better place to put the drug in than in the air itself? It made sense. This way Humarise could make sure that their secret was safe and everyone in the dome would have their quirks dormant. Hinata included. Hinata buried his face in his hands, grumbling. He hadn't even been here for less than a couple of hours and his quirk was already disabled. He started flailing his arm and spinning with nervous energy. At one point he turned around and found a couple staring at him. They took one look at his costume with a weird face and kept walking. Probably a cosplay. One of them whispered, "Right, the jacket." He waited in the alley until a man walked by and he swiftly snatched his black jacket without him noticing. The jacket of course was huge. But then again, he was short, or as his dad calls him, a little tangerine. He silently chuckled as he thought of his dad, but his smile quickly dropped. He stopped walking and looked around. He hated the position he was in, but he was a hero and being in difficult positions is part of the job. But, I don't really want to be a hero. He shook his head, trying to get the thoughts to leave him alone. He continued walking. For now he needed to focus on finding a way out so he could do his job. As a hero. Not like I have a choice. Don't be selfish, he mumbled. Chapter text. After about an hour of roaming the streets, Hinata found a decent hotel to spend the night in. He was thankful that the money system hadn't changed and that he had brought some. He didn't have much though, so the best he could get was a moldy, smelly and tiny room with thin walls. Hinata immediately slumped into the stiff mattress, exhausted from the last couple of hours. What now? He hugged his shoulders tight. He knew he needed rest, but he doubted he could sleep with him jumping at every sound. Regardless, he should at least lay down so his body could rest, even for a little bit. He needed all the energy he could get if he was going to find a way out of here. And who knows, if the drowsiness settles in he may be able to get a couple hours of sleep. Hinata woke up early the next morning for 3 reasons. 1 because the bed was uncomfortable, 2 because he was hungry and 3 out of habit. His hero training always had him up before the sun rose up. His trainers had zero patience for tardiness and were really strict. Some of them were pretty violent, but they did teach him the best way to use his quirk when his dad wasn't around. It's thanks to all that training that made him a really good fighter, and kept him alive. Hinata rubbed his eyes and shook off all distractions. He needed a plan. But first things first, he needed breakfast. He didn't trust the food at the motel and going to a public place like a restaurant probably wasn't the best idea. It was also hot, but then again his hero costume was designed to keep him warm when he flew. He still had the jacket he stole last night, but people might give him weird looks if he walked around with a jacket on a hot day. Hinata looked out the window. He was still a little shocked at sight. Last night Hinata made sure he was farther away from the city to avoid the crowds, and he now found himself in the more rural and peaceful part of town. Peaceful. Well, that was a word he hadn't used in a while. If he walked around for a little bit, Hinata should be able to find a thrift store where he could buy cheap clothes. And for the food, a local convenience store would have to do it for now. He left a couple of layers of his costume and his goggles at the hotel, before setting off to find what was needed. His costume wasn't all that extravagant compared to other heroes' costumes. It was almost an exact replica of his dad's costume, except his was black with orange highlights to match his wings and ginger hair. Since it was still early, Hinata managed to avoid the people around, and after a few minutes he was able to find a thrift store that was thankfully open at 5 a.m. The second he walked in the thrift store he noticed the weird looks from the workers. They were probably wondering why there was a kid there so early and what the heck he was wearing. Hinata felt a bit embarrassed and instead chose to direct his focus on getting the cheapest and least ugly clothes he could find. Hinata ended up with a decent pile of clothes and quickly paid the cashier. He made his way back to the hotel to both change and leave his new clothes. He changed into some comfy black sport shorts and a simple white shirt. Perfectly normal clothes for a kid his age on a warm day. He left once again, but this time to look for food. He didn't need much, so a small convenience store will do. Hinata kept walking down the road as he saw the place slowly come to life as more people woke up. After being almost convinced that he was now lost, Hinata finally saw what looked like a place that offered food. Sakanoshita Market, he read. Perfect, he thought as he walked in. He opened the door and was welcomed with the smell of cigarettes and saw a man with blonde hair sitting comfortably at the front desk reading a book. The man didn't even look his way as he walked down the aisles, and once Hinata was out of view he couldn't help but let out a grateful sigh. Attention meant questions and he wasn't sure he was ready to come up with lies too early in the morning. He grabbed a small basket and looked around for anything he might need. The first thing he grabbed was water. He hadn't realized how thirsty he was as he opened the bottle. It was empty in seconds. He reached out for the next one and was ready to open it when he heard some angry yelling. "Hey, you gotta pay for that." The blonde man was walking his way. "You're free to get whatever you want but you gotta pay, kid." Ukai looked down at the kid as he kept apologizing with his face bright red. Probably from embarrassment. "Listen, kid, as long as you pay there's no harm, you got that?" He told him. Yes sir," he said quickly. He watched the kid fill his basket with more water as he kept walking down the snack aisle and he went back to his book. The kid seemed a bit jumpy and he wondered what he was doing here on a Monday morning. Shouldn't he be in school? It wasn't his business, he told himself. A few minutes passed and the kid came back, ready to check out. He started doing his job and Ukai decided to feed his curiosity, just a little. "So what exactly are you doing here, kid? Shouldn't you be in school?" Even though he asked the question in his usual bored tone, the kid still stiffened as he talked to him. The ginger quickly looked up and gave a quick response. "Don't have school today, haha, got cancelled." MHH. The kid was obviously lying but he didn't see the point in pushing him further. After all, Ukai would be lying if he said he never skipped school when he was his age. "So how old are ya, kid?" It took the kid longer than it should have to answer the question. 16, he mumbled. He stopped for a second and looked at the boy. He was really short. For a second he thought he was a middle schooler, but then again the kid Nishinoya is probably even shorter, and he was a menace. The kid didn't notice his reaction, keeping his head down, before paying for his food and leaving with a quick goodbye. What an odd kid, he told himself. The rest of the day went just like any other day. The daily locals came in, he read his books and magazines, and that stupid guy Takeda came in, again, and tried to convince him to coach. Again. After practically throwing Takeda out the door he sat down and looked at the clock. He could feel another headache coming his way. Those kids from Karasuno were sure to make their way here. They usually always come here after school. Thankfully, he still had some minutes of peace, and he was going to cherish them. That was until he heard someone open the door. Did the kids get off school early? To his surprise he didn't find the Karasuno kids but instead the short ginger from earlier. He had changed into a pair of jeans and a black hoodie that was too big for him. Not to mention he seemed slightly out of breath. "Hey kid, you good?" Ukai asked him. "Oh, all good thanks." He gave him a smile and Ukai couldn't help but compare it to the sun. "So, is there anything you need?" Ukai asked. "I'm just here for some water." He reassured him before making his way to the nearest fridge. "Didn't you buy like 10 bottles this morning?" Ukai asked him, remembering his recent shopping spree. The kid froze for a second before responding. "Oh, yeah, I left them all at my house and know I'm thirsty so here I am again." The kid came up to the register and he did his job. He didn't fail to notice how the kid kept on fidgeting with his hoodie and looking over his shoulders. "That'll be it, kid." "Oh yeah, right, thank you." He gave him the same innocent sunshine smile and left the money on the counter. Then without warning he heard yelling from outside. "What did you say to me?" He immediately recognized Tanaka's angry loud voice. "Hey," he got up and threw the door wide open. "No fighting. Nobody wants to hear your yapping." Sure enough, Daichi, Shuga, Tanaka and some other kid he didn't recognize were there. Tanaka turned around to face him and ended up slapping Daichi on the face. The ball he had on his hands went flying in the air heading towards one of the nearby houses. Daichi and Shuga were busy scowling Tanaka and didn't even notice. The new guy with raven black hair however saw it and crouched down, ready to jump. "I got it," he said in a monotone voice. But before he could even move, a dash of ginger hair zoomed by Ukai and jumped up to get it. The other kids stopped their brawl and looked at the kid speechless. He looked like he was flying way above the ground, ball in hand. He landed perfectly with the ball and a smile on his face. "Here you go," he said as he handed the ball to the raven-haired boy. Chapter text. After leaving the market, Hinata went back to the motel to recharge. He quickly ate a few snacks and water and laid on his back, allowing himself to feel slightly better considering his situation. "Okay, time for a plan," he stated. While his number one priority is to make it out of the dome alive, he figured that if the HSPC found out that he managed to infiltrate the base that they have been trying to break into for years and escaped without getting any sort of useful information, Hinata might not get the best response. So a new plan. Get out of here alive but also try to get useful intel for future battles. Of course that only made his plan more complicated and opened the door for more questions. The main question was how. Normally a quick search on the internet would help, but he's in a society that's core foundation is built up on lies, drugs and memory wipes, so it wouldn't really surprise him if Humarise took it upon themselves to spy on people's search history. It kind of reminded him of his own society from his perspective, only his was slightly less extreme. Slightly. The second he types the word quirk on any electronic device, they're going to know that something's wrong. He paced around the room trying to come up with another solution, but there really wasn't much he could do at the moment, and it was worth a shot. He changed into a pair of jeans and a large hoodie before heading outside. His plan was simple. Get far away from the area he was currently in. That way if he is discovered, whoever goes to investigate will most likely search that area instead of the area he is currently in. There he could find a place with a computer or some other device where he could do his research and hopefully get at least some answers. He bought a bus ticket to get to the city faster and save time. The ride wasn't that long, but once he arrived at his destination, Hinata immediately felt overwhelmed. Although Hinata was mostly raised in a small town away from the city with his mom and sister, he did visit the city a lot. His mom would give him a special backpack to hide his wings and then take both him and his sister to see their dad. In secret, of course. At the time the world wasn't aware that the pro-hero Hawks had not one but two kids. And that one of them had inherited his quirk. His dad would somehow manage to slip away from the HSPC and hang out with them in his disguise. The four of them would then pass the day doing whatever they wanted in the city. It was fun. Hinata never thought he would experience it again, but here he was. And the feeling wasn't fun, it was stressful, but then again so was the situation he was in. Hinata took a deep breath before making his way through the crowd of people, keeping his head down. A few minutes later he found a small and cozy internet cafe. One quick peek inside showed him a row of slightly outdated computers and the smell of sweet pastries. He quickly made sure his hood was still on before walking in. He really wanted a hot chocolate, but he was low on money and didn't want to risk anyone seeing his face. Hinata sat down and turned the computer, his hands hovering over the keyboard. He had no way of knowing if this would even work, and even if it did he would most likely be placing himself at risk. Don't be a coward. He straightened up. He was a hero, he had a job to do and people who needed him. The risk is part of the job. But there was also something else he wanted. He looked over his shoulder. He knew no one was there, but he still felt guilty as he typed what he wanted to know instead of doing his job. He clicked enter and looked down at his knees feeling ashamed, but all of that vanished when he looked back at the screen and saw a volleyball player with the number 10 on his back soaring through the court. The little giant, he whispered. Hinata quickly grabbed some headphones and clicked on one of the videos. The second he clicked it, all thoughts had left him. His quirk, the war, the drugs, everything. The only thing on his mind was the little giant as he kept on spiking the ball, not being stopped by the huge opponents he was facing. Every time it looked like he was going to be blocked, he somehow managed to get higher off the ground, overcoming every wall in his way. The screen was so much better than the first time he had seen it. It happened a while ago when he and some other heroes were sent to investigate a recently abandoned Humarise base. The place had been completely destroyed and there was hardly anything useful. Except for a broken down TV. After a good kick to the side it glitched back to life, showing Hinata one of the best things he had ever seen, a volleyball match. The first thing he did when he got back was search for a volleyball, which was a lot harder than it seemed. The people around him were so focused on ending the war that they had no room for anything else. Eventually he did manage to find one, and whenever he could he would sneak out and practice any way he could. Most of it was self-taught, but he managed. The problem was that he was alone, he had no team. And although he kept practicing, he realized that until the war ended there was very little hope he could play volleyball. Even if they won the war, he doubted the HSPC would let him be free. He was on a leash and volleyball was the one of the few things that helped him forget that. That made him feel normal. He heard a loud slam. The little giant had just spiked another point as the crowd cheered. His teammates were smiling at him and patting him in the back. Hinata paused the video as reality sunk in once again, reminding him of his dream that would forever remain out of reach. He closed the window, already missing the sport, but he had other things to do, more important things. Dawn of the Quirks. Once again he clicked enter. The page started loading, but the only thing he saw was a couple of cartoon hero movies. He tried again asking about mutation quirks and famous old heroes like All Might, but nothing came up. With every key he typed he felt more and more on edge before slowly getting up and leaving the cafe. He walked calmly for a couple of minutes and then broke into a sprint and ran as fast as his legs could carry him. He got back on the bus and forced his legs to stop bouncing on the way back. He quickly got off on his stop and walked around the area, keeping his head down. A few more minutes of walking aimlessly left Hinata realizing how dry his throat felt, now that most of the stress was gone. Where was the market again? He mumbled. He could really use some water right now. Thankfully the area looked familiar and he was quickly able to find the market. The guy at the counter was slightly intimidating, but thankfully it all went smoothly. The guy did ask him a couple of questions to which he answered as best as he could, but other than that it was all good. That was until a couple of high schoolers showed up. They were having their fun when the blonde man started yelling at them and somehow their volleyball was thrown in the air. Hinata watched as it flew across the sky, realizing how clean it was compared to his own, and before he could stop himself, he dropped his water bottle and raced towards it. He lowered his stance and spread his arms like wings, like how he had seen in the video. He jumped up in the air and caught the ball perfectly. He hit the floor and turned around holding the ball towards a raven-haired boy. "Here you go." Kageyama stared at the ginger-haired boy with slightly wide eyes for a few seconds before he grabbed the ball, mumbling a thank you. "Wow, that was one jump," exclaimed Daichi. The ginger kid seemed a little flustered with the praise. "Really? Thank you. Have you ever tried volleyball before?" asked Tanaka. "'Cause with those kinds of jumps I bet you'd be a pretty good spiker." "Wait, are you guys on the volleyball team?" asked the ginger with a bright smile. Kageyama couldn't help but scowl at him. There was something off about this kid. The guy didn't even look his way, not noticing the stink eye he was giving him. "Yep, we are all part of the Karasuno volleyball team," said Shuga, answering the kid's question and reminding Kageyama to fix his face. He really needed to work on that one. The kid's eyes practically sparkled, and his face showed a bright smile. Just like the little giant. Daichi couldn't help but smile at his bright energy. Yep, the little giant went to Karasuno and even made it to nationals. He told the kid. Many people now see Karasuno as a former powerhouse team, so it was rather refreshing to see someone acknowledge Karasuno's former glory. "Yeah, I remember watching him on TV," exclaimed the ginger. The way he kept jumping and spiking the ball no matter how many times the blockers tried to stop him. The kid was clearly drawn to the subject, with the way he talked about it. "Well, it looks like you could be just like him, with how high you can jump," answered Tanaka. "Once you're old enough you should come to Karasuno, then join the volleyball club with us." The ginger's happy face quickly crumbled as he looked down in defeat. "I'm a first year in high school," he muttered. The four of them stared at him for a little while before reacting. "Tanaka, why would you say that?" yelled Shuga as he slapped him on the back of the head. "Apologize." Daichi saw from the corner of his eyes the owner of the market stare at them with a tired expression. All Daichi could offer him was an awkward wave before he went back in the store. "No, it's all good," said the kid, but he still looked down with a distressed expression. "Hey, we didn't get your name," Daichi asked him, trying to leave Tanaka's mess behind. It seemed to do the trick. The guy looked up with a much happier expression. "I'm Shoyo Hinata. Nice to meet you, Hinata. I'm Daichi Sawamura. I'm the team's captain and play the position of wing spiker." "Wow, are you all part of the volleyball club?" Hinata asked. "Yeah, we are," answered Tanaka aggressively. "We are Karasuno's volley team and some of the best and fiercest players you have ever seen." Daichi quickly pulled him away before he could get all over Hinata's face and scare him. That didn't stop his yelling though. "I play wing spiker," yelled Tanaka, and Shuga slapped him in the back of the head to shut him up. "I'm the vice captain and play setter," replied Shuga. Hinata looked at Kageyama waiting for his response. It took him longer to reply than it should, but after a while he sighed and said bluntly, "I'm a setter." "But isn't Shuga the setter?" Hinata asked, pointing at Shuga. "There can be more than just one setter, idiot," snapped Kageyama. "Do you even know anything about volleyball? Hey, just because I'm asking a question doesn't mean I'm clueless. And don't call me an idiot," Hinata shot back. "Only someone with a brain as small as yours would be here fanboying about a sport they hardly even know about." "Hey, well, who made you king of the court?" Daichi's eyes immediately went to Kageyama. He knew he had a rough history with his middle school team and the title they gave him. But of all the words Hinata could have used, why did it have to be those words? "Don't call me that," Kageyama answered coldly, and Hinata couldn't help but flinch under his intimidating stare. "Why don't we calm down a little?" intervened Shuga. Both first years mumbled an apology but kept glaring at each other. Daichi could already sense the stress those two would cause him. "Well, it's getting late," said Daichi, noticing the time. "We should all probably head home." "You're probably right," agreed Shuga. "It was nice meeting you, Hinata." "Yeah, hope we see each other again," replied Tonka, already leaving along with Shuga. "That'd be great," Hinata shouted back. "Oh, Hinata," asked Daichi, "I don't think you told us what school you go to. If you don't mind me asking." "Oh, well," he looked away looking a little nervous. "I'm homeschooled, yeah that. My dad travels a lot and he teaches me on the go." He laughed awkwardly. "Oh well, that's nothing to be ashamed of." Daichi quickly reassured him. "I was just wondering if you would like to come to see us practice tomorrow at Karasuno." Hinata just blinked at him for a couple of seconds, but before he could ask anything else he suddenly jumped up really high. "Really? I can go watch you guys practice?" Hinata asked, buzzing with energy. "Sure, why not?" Daichi told him. Hinata seemed like a nice guy and he wouldn't mind getting the rest of the team to know him. But the main reason was because of how he managed to piss off Kageyama. It wasn't the mean type like Tsukishima, but the type that reminded him that Kageyama was just a lonely kid who needed to learn a thing or two about teamwork. Daichi had this gut feeling that if two of them could get along, something amazing would follow suit. Yes, said Hinata. He started backing away as he kept on saying how he couldn't wait to meet them and see them play. Before he rounded the corner with one last goodbye, and all Daichi could hear were his quick footsteps. Daichi stood there for a while feeling happy with his new idea, when he suddenly remembered something. "Hinata, wait, I didn't tell you where Karasuno is," he yelled as he ran after the speedy ginger. Chapter text. Hinata stared at the crumpled up piece of paper on his bed. Last night Daichi had given it to him with the address to Karasuno, so he could visit the team. He had been too excited at the time and quickly said yes without giving it a second thought. But now, after thinking about it, he realized it wasn't such a good idea. He was supposed to be finding a way out of here, not playing around at some school with kids. "You're 16, he reminded himself. "Not important," he mumbled. He needed to focus on his goal. Maybe he could go somewhere else and try to do some more research. No, if Humarise is as paranoid as he thinks they are, then more research might do more harm than good. Besides, looking up information had led him nowhere and he didn't have any other plans at the moment. The best idea would be to lay low, at least for a day, and try something else tomorrow. But that left him with nothing to do today, and Hinata really didn't feel like being alone with his thoughts in a smelly room. Well, that settled it. Hinata snatched the piece of paper and marched out his room. He wasn't going to do anything, so he might as well try to understand this society. He could learn their school system, their daily routines, examine the food, maybe even learn a few volleyball tricks. That's useful, right? Thoughts of trying to validate his choice flooded his mind as he tried to push down the small pile of guilt in his chest. His mind must have gone on autopilot because soon enough he found himself in front of Karasuno High School's gate, the same school the little giant went to. He couldn't help but smile. Wait a minute, it's still morning. Hinata slapped his forehead and let out an embarrassed groan. He was an idiot. Daichi told him practice started in the afternoon. The team was most likely in class right now and would be for at least a couple of more hours. He could leave and come back later, but he had no place to go other than the rotten motel. Maybe he could go to the market. No, the blonde guy was scary, and he really didn't want to answer whatever questions he had. Hinata looked around before looking back at Karasuno High. He has used his stealth skills on multiple locations before, but he never thought he would one day use them to sneak into a high school. Strangely, the thought just made Hinata feel jittery with excitement. Although he had been trained by strict professionals that worked for the HSPC, the only lessons that really stuck to Hinata were the ones he learned from Eraserhead. The two heroes have been paired together on multiple missions together, and although Eraser can be quite demanding and way too honest whenever Hinata messes up, he's patient and treats him well. Most likely due to the fact he was a teacher before it all went down. Eraserhead is so cool. It was a bit hard to adjust his weight since he was missing his wings, but Hinata quickly found a nearby tree and was able to jump over Karasuno's gates. His victory was cut short when he was almost spotted by a teacher in the hall. With his bright ginger hair and being the only kid not wearing a uniform, he was bound to get kicked out the second a teacher saw him. He needed to find a place to hide for a while. After walking around aimlessly for a few minutes and a few close calls, Hinata finally found the volleyball gym. It only took a few sticks and lockpicking skills for Hinata to get the door open. The second he looked inside, his jaw dropped. He was on a volleyball court, a real volleyball court. And to make it even better, it was the same one the little giant had trained on. He found a closet filled with volleyball equipment and his smile only grew more. The others would probably take a while to get here, and while he waited, he was going to have as much fun as possible. For Kageyama, school was in some words predictable. Nothing interesting happened. If he had to point something out, he would probably mention the annoying tall blonde guy that kept bothering him. The guy had a big mouth that didn't know when to shut up. It was really pissing him off. He was heading to the volleyball court with the rest of the team. If he could even call them that. It wasn't that he didn't like them, some of them weren't half bad, he just couldn't feel any sort of connection. Even the team itself even seemed divided. Tanaka, Daichi and Shuga were on one side and the blonde guy was talking to a guy with freckles on the other side. The rest of the second years were basically just there without doing much. That left Kageyama in the middle, and even he could tell something or maybe someone was missing to truly connect the group. Tanaka, did you forget to lock the gym last night? Asked Shuga. They were right in front of the gym and sure enough the door was slightly propped open. What are you talking about, Shuga? Of course I did, said Tanaka. Then why is it unlocked? Tanaka, Shuga, is that you? Shuga was interrupted by a familiar squeaky voice from inside the gym. Daichi stepped up and slid the door open. Who's in here? Oh my gosh. Kageyama peeked inside and found the ginger from yesterday tangled on the net as he started wailing for help. Hinata, what happened? Asked Daichi. Hinata. Right, that was his name. He recalled. I'm sorry, I came in a bit early and tried to put up the net. Hinata tried to get up but quickly fell back down on the mess he made. Hinata, stop moving, urged Shuga, we're going to get you out. The net is eating me, he cried. Idiot, you're getting yourself tangled up even more, Kageyama yelled. I told you that I'm not an idiot, he exclaimed. Well, you are one if you managed to fail this miserably at putting up a net. Stop judging me and get me out of here. Stop moving then, idiot. It took them all way longer than it should have to get Hinata out of this mess, but eventually they managed to set him free. "Hey Shuga," asked Kageyama. The setter had told him that he could ask him anything he needed, but it still felt weird asking for help. What is he doing here? Shuga must have guessed who he was referring to and offered him a small smile. "I'm not really sure exactly." Kageyama gave him a confused look. Did this mean that the guy broke into the school and the gym? Is that legal? Sorry, that's my fault. Both teammates turned towards Daichi, making his way towards them. I told Hinata that he could come watch us practice yesterday. It completely slipped my mind to tell you guys. Shuga chuckled while Kageyama felt slightly better knowing the crazy ginger didn't just break in. It's okay. Just warn first before you bring in someone for practice, replied Shuga. Come on, let's set up the net. The third years all started to set up the court and Daichi told Kageyama to introduce Hinata to the rest of the team. Kageyama really didn't know what to do with the little tangerine, but he hardly had to do anything. Hinata was already bothering everyone with his apparently infinite energy. The rest of the team seemed to be bonding well with him until he walked up to Tsukishima. Wow! Hinata stared in amazement. You're a first year. How tall are you? I'm sorry, but exactly who are you? Tsukishima replied, annoyed. Oh, I'm Shoyo Hinata. Yes, I know that you already said that at least 50 times. Tsukishima looked down at him with his usual scowl. He noticed Hinata physically flinched in embarrassment. What I meant is, why are you here? Continued Tsukishima. Well, yesterday I met the captain, and he invited me over to watch you guys practice since I really like volleyball. Explained Hinata, stuttering. Well, I'm pretty sure you mean you love to watch it and not actually play it. He grinned. The annoying grin Kageyama always wanted to punch. I play volleyball. Hinata's voice shocked only a little. Huh, well, I can't wait to see you try. Behind him Yamaguchi covered his mouth, preventing a giggle. Shuga watched from a distance as Hinata talked to the rest of the team. He seemed to be getting along with them rather well, until he went to talk to Tsukishima. Hey Daichi, he asked, getting his captain's attention. While I don't mind having Hinata here for practice, I am curious as to why you invited him here. Daichi finished setting up the net and looked at him with a smile. Let's just say I got a good feeling about it. Shuga gave him a raised eyebrow, not really understanding what he meant by that. Before he could ask though, Daichi was already rounding everyone up to start practice. Since the first years were still new members, they decided that a short practice match would help them understand on what level they are. They had been doing this for the last couple of days, and usually the court is filled with nothing but the sound of squeaking shoes or bouncing volleyballs. But now that Hinata was there, the court felt much more alive in a sense. Hinata kept bouncing from one side of the court to the other, trying to get a better angle of the game while making a lot of sound effects and cheers whenever the ball zoomed above the net. Doesn't that shrimp know when to shut up? Asked Tsukishima. Shuga couldn't help but giggle at Hinata's energy. The thing that gave him the best reaction though was when Tanaka spiked the ball straight on the ground as he screamed at the top of his lungs. Other than Kyoko's whistle, the court was awkwardly silent. Shuga and the rest of the team looked up at Hinata, who was currently on the second floor, waiting for some sort of cheer. Instead, Hinata looked speechless, his eyes staring at the spot where the ball landed in pure astonishment. Hey, don't I get a cheer? Tanaka's words were quickly interrupted by Hinata jumping really high in the air and his loud cheers. Whoa! The ball went up like whoosh and then jumped and managed to hit the ball like bam. Even though there were two blockers in your way like this. Hinata's arm went high up as he imitated Tsukishima. Tsukishima just gave him an annoyed look, clearly offended. Shuga couldn't help but smile at the ginger's excitement. Hinata's energy kept going until Shuga and the rest of the team nearly got a heart attack when Hinata leapt from the railing and onto the floor. Hinata just landed perfectly and quickly went up to Tanaka, unaware of how he left the rest of them feeling. Are you a spiker? You must be right. Spiker are the ones that jump and hit the ball like bam. It took Tanaka a couple of seconds to register what was happening and happily took in all of Hinata's praises. Everyone quickly snapped out of their tiny heart attacks and went to interact with Hinata. Hinata managed to keep most of the team smiling and more motivated. It was safe to say that practice that day had been a lot of fun. Until the last few minutes of it. Chapter text. Practice quickly came to an end and Shuga found himself cleaning up with Tanaka, Daichi, Kageyama and Hinata. Although Kageyama was mostly doing some extra practice. As Shuga picked up the last few volleyballs from the ground he noticed Hinata walking up to Kageyama. "Can you please set a ball for me?" he blurted out. Kageyama looked down at him with a confused expression before quickly looking away. "No." "What? But why not? You're really good at it and I just want one," responded Hinata. "I'm not just gonna set for you," Kageyama shot back. "If you're not going to do it right then I just don't see why I should do it. You look like you barely even know anything about volleyball." "I can play volleyball," Hinata said with determination. "Really, cause all you have done is jump around and get excited for a simple match." Shuga could feel the tension between the two of them. Although he wanted to interfere, he also realized that this was the most they had gotten to see of Kageyama. What's the point of being the king of the court if you don't set for other people? Even from a distance Shuga saw the way Kageyama flinched from the nickname. "I told you not to call me that," he said coldly. "I don't understand," said Hinata, trembling slightly. "Yamaguchi told me that's how they called you in middle school, so." "I told you to stop, you idiot," yelled Kageyama. "Not only are you an annoying volleyball fanboy but you also don't know when to shut up." Shuga quickly realized that this wasn't going anywhere. He got up, already thinking of ways to separate them. "You two stop it." The two first years froze in place as it was Karasuno's captain who spoke and walked up to them. Shuga quickly noticed that he was using his captain's voice and simply followed close behind Daichi just in case. He stood in front of them for a while and Shuga could tell he was thinking hard on something before the gears finally clicked. His lips turned to a tiny smirk and Shuga could already tell that whatever plan he had wasn't going to be fun for the two guys. "Please, I'll get along with the team, Captain," Kageyama said at the door. But nothing seemed to work. A match against the annoying glasses guy, the freckled guy, and the captain. That's what he needed to do, and to make things worse he had to do it with the little shrimp. He would still be part of the team if he lost, but he won't be able to play setter. He needed to win. He was good at other positions, but if he wasn't the setter then what was the point? "You know, I don't know why you are so upset," Hinata said. Kageyama really wanted to strangle this guy. "You may not be able to set but you can still play. You can jump and hit the ball like, whoosh, and jump so high." He didn't get to finish that sentence, because Kageyama quickly spun around and grabbed him from the collar. "I don't want to spike, I want to be a setter," he yelled. "Don't you understand? The setter is the control tower of the team that helps the others succeed. It's the most dominant role. It's the coolest." "Huh." Hinata seemed dazed at his reaction. "Your favorite, the spiker. Who do you think gets the ball to the spiker, the setter?" Kageyama let go of Hinata as he stumbled back. "The setter tricks the enemy blockers. The setter tears down the wall for the spiker. That's the setter." After he was done he saw Hinata's eyes sparkle. "Now I understand why you want to be the setter." "What?" Kageyama couldn't tell if he actually understood anything he had just said. He was just caught up in the moment and grew anxious. "So now all we have to do is win, right?" asked Hinata. Kageyama quickly adjusted his face. He couldn't be the weak one here. He could probably set to that second year. "Well, for that we have to train," he stated. "Especially you. Don't think for a second that I didn't see your sorry excuse of a receive earlier." Hinata's face quickly flushed in embarrassment, before he remembered something. "We can't train in the gym though." "Hey Daichi." The two of them turned around towards Tanaka, who was near the window angling his head towards them. "We have early practice at 7 a.m. right?" Kageyama quickly caught up on what he wanted them to do, and although Hinata may be stupid he could sense he also got the message. "Tomorrow," he said. 5 a.m. Hinata finished, as he quickened his step. "Don't be late." Kageyama walked a little faster. "You don't be late." Next thing he knew they were both running at full speed. Back at the motel Hinata reviewed what exactly he had gotten himself into. Hinata knew he should have just said no. Daichi had told him he had the option, but he knew that if he didn't do it there might be a chance that Kageyama may never play setter again. He just couldn't do that to Kageyama. Ever since he saw the Little Giants match, all he ever really wanted was to play volleyball with a team. When Kageyama started telling him about why he wanted to be a setter, he couldn't help but compare it to how he wanted to be an ace. He could do both. He had to keep searching for a way out and a way to gather intel, and Kageyama had to go to school. So he could search during that time and maybe even at night. With a new plan in sight, Hinata decided right then and there that he was going to help Kageyama achieve his goal. He refused to let anyone be stopped to fulfill their dreams. He may not be able to reach his dream yet, but he was going to help Kageyama reach his. Good luck to you both. Now let's begin, yelled Daichi. It was finally here, the day of the match, to see if Kageyama would become Karasuno's setter. For the past week Hinata had been practicing his receives with Kageyama, and he still refused to set for him. He only agreed to it once, and it was amazing. It didn't matter that he was tired. Both of them have been fighting all week, and that set had made Hinata feel that even though Kageyama still had a long way to go, he was improving. He had spent the last couple of days searching for police stations and memorizing their routines. If he played his cards right, he could probably sneak in and try to use their computer or maybe steal a radio. He shook his head. He shouldn't be thinking that now. He needs to focus. This was going to be so much fun. The match started as him, Tanaka and Kageyama got in position ready to face the opposing team. The first few points were awesome. Tsukishima made the mistake of making Tanaka angry, and he was able to score a few points with amazing spikes. At some point he even took his shirt off and swung it around. Then it was Hinata's turn. He ran near the net and jumped the ball coming at him. This was it, his first point in a match. He was going to spike and score. And then the wall came. Tsukishima loomed over him as he blocked his spike with a sly grin. Gotta say, you sure have an impressive jump. He sneered. If only you were 30 centimeters taller, you would have been a superstar. One more, was all Hinata said. He walked back to position, refusing to look down. He knew he was going to struggle after all. The only training he had was from Kageyama and Shuga, who volunteered to help him receive. Before, his only training companion was a hidden corner and a tablet with outdated volleyball matches. He expected the struggle, but that didn't make it any less infuriating. Hinata jumped, got ready, and was blocked, again. You know, I was expecting more from the king, said Tsukishima. And what was that king toss you always did? Why not use it? He was clearly trying to get under Kageyama's skin, and Hinata couldn't help but feel like it was working. A few points lost later, Tsukishima came back at it again, calling Kageyama king. Hey, I interrupted. You haven't stopped getting all over our faces. And what's this about the king? You're saying you don't know why they call him that? Smirked Tsukishima, making Hinata even more pissed. It's because he is so good, right? That the other guys are intimidated by him. Hinata quickly realized that probably wasn't the reason, but he didn't really have any other ideas. Tsukishima laughed. You aren't from around, right? I guess that's what anyone would think. However, his nickname, King of the Court, was given by his past teammates from middle school. He's the egocentric king. Even with his talent, he was still sent to the bench, since his teammates refused to listen to him. Tsukishima looked behind Hinata, probably at Kageyama, and although Hinata didn't turn around, he could tell Kageyama wasn't feeling great about the statement. But there was one thing that didn't make sense to him. But that was all in junior high, right? Everyone looked at him with a bit of shock on their face. He guessed they were all probably expecting some sort of reaction after Tsukishima's statement. Especially Kageyama. He shifted his stance, now having everyone in his view. He tosses to me just fine. It makes no difference to me. My problem right now is getting past you. He pointed at Tsukishima and noticed a few other team members smile, but he didn't have time to worry about that. Kageyama, he walked up to the setter. We are going to beat them, and you will play setter and be a part of this team. He saw Kageyama's face twitch the more he spoke before he along with the others went back to their positions. The ball was in the air, and before the ball even got to Kageyama he let his instincts kick and jumped ready to spike the ball. Kageyama, he yelled, I'm here. He noticed something in the way Kageyama looked at him, but he didn't get a chance to think about that before the ball came to him and he stumbled and awkwardly hit the ball out. What the hell was that? Yelled Kageyama. The ball came to me. He yelled, cutting him off. Forget about junior high. I'll take any pass. I'll jump anywhere. Take any ball. So, pass to me. There was a beat of silence that followed. Hinata wasn't sure what exactly he had just said to get that reaction, but Tanaka was quickly there to fill in the quiet. Hey, you guys know how to make quick hits. Not at all, he responded. All I've ever spiked are balls that get tossed high up. But that's what you just did, explained Tanaka. Well, I don't really remember how I did it. But, I'll do it. He turned to Kageyama, who in turn looked away. We are not coordinated. That'll be impossible. Impossible. He didn't like the sound of that. You are weird. Shut up, Kageyama mumbled. You know, some people just aren't cut out to be a volleyball player, or in your case a spiker. Said Tsukishima. If only you were a bit taller and actually had some experience. You're right, answered Hinata. He hated to admit it, but he was right. Height is essential for volleyball and I don't have that, much less experience. But I still want to play volleyball. And if I can't be in this team, then I'm going to help Kageyama play with you as a setter. He refused to look away from Tsukishima's gaze. To block the wall for the spiker, said Kageyama. He walked up to Hinata and stood next to him facing Tsukishima. That's the job of the setter. Everyone looked shocked at Kageyama's statement. Tsukishima just looked annoyed, but before Hinata could say anything else, he was being dragged to the back of the court by Kageyama. What, Kageyama, let me go. He let go of his shirt but was now holding him by the head. Of course, this wasn't unusual, everyone's always touching his hair. He doesn't know why though. Listen, started Kageyama. He proceeded to give him a quick rundown on what to do, and even though Hinata didn't understand it completely, he was still going to try. It was way harder than it looked. The ball was way too fast and they weren't coordinated. At one point he even got stuck in the net, again. Kageyama. Hinata turned to Shuga. You're repeating what you did in junior high. Hinata was getting really tired of this whole junior high thing that he didn't know about. Hinata doesn't have any technique or experience. Hinata felt his pride deflate a little. But he has potential, Shuga said. Hinata felt way better. He really liked Shuga. You need to. Coordinate, no. Whatever Shuga wanted to say was clearly not coming out the way he wanted it to. Well, use it to your advantage. With that in mind and another half-baked plan, they got ready to continue the game. He could tell Kageyama was concentrating, but he had his own job to do. He closed his eyes, jumped, and he felt the ball in his palm as he spiked it. Wham! The ball landed at top speed, leaving everyone shocked. Guys, said Daichi looking dazed. Hinata had his eyes closed. What? Everyone yelled, but Hinata was too focused on his spike to pay them any mind. Awesome, it hit my hand. He cheered. Hey, why did you do that? Asked Kageyama. How could you trust so much? He looked both confused and irritated. Well, I don't have any other choice but to trust you. He yelled back. It made sense to him. What other option did they have? Kageyama's face went back to its neutral state. I don't have faith in us. But I'll keep sending you the ball. Just trust me and jump. Hinata gave him a determined nod and the game went back on track. The quick didn't really work, but there was one thing pushing him forward. The sensation on his palm and the weight of the ball. He really likes how it feels. One more. He ran towards the net and saw both Tsukishima and Waimaguchi ready to block him. But it didn't matter because he remembered what Kageyama had told him. He planted his feet and dashed to the other side. If he's not as tall as the others, then he just needed to be faster to reach the top. He jumped and closed his eyes, but he knew the ball was coming and spiked. At that moment he opened his eyes and saw the view. He had seen many amazing views. He can fly after all. But this one, this view from the summit, was without a doubt the best one he has ever seen. Chapter text. To say that Shuga was impressed was an understatement. He was now seeing Kageyama's full skills as a setter, but he knew that the one that got him to that point was Hinata. There was just something about him that made Shuga smile. It was a shame that Hinata wasn't a student at Karasuno. He could have been an amazing player and teammate. He looked around and sure enough the team was smiling as Hinata laughed and jumped around, almost as if giving them all energy. They won the first set and were getting ready for the next, and he could tell Hinata was having fun. Even Kageyama seemed happier. The second set came and went, with Hinata getting hit in the face a couple of times and leaving both teams tired as Hinata and Kageyama won. "Oi, Daichi, Shuga," yelled Tanaka, "did you two know that was going to happen when you paired them up?" "What?" Shuga asked. He had known they were going to make an amazing team based on Daichi's instincts, but he hadn't predicted them to be that good. Even Daichi knew that. "It's such a shame Hinata isn't on the team." Daichi sighs. "With both him and Kageyama we would be unstoppable. Why do the best players always have to have some dumb excuse to not be able to play?" Tanaka complained. "It's not dumb," Shuga countered. "Hinata's father travels a lot and he's homeschooled." Just then the team's counselor Takehata came in with news. "It's decided," he said out of breath. "A match against Aoba Josai. A top 4, mumbled Shuga. The rest of the team started discussing this too. Kageyama's expression looked off though. Shuga and Daichi went up to him to ask how he got it. Hopefully he hadn't begged again. There was one condition though. Kageyama had to play setter. "What?" Tanaka exclaimed. "It sounds like they're more interested in Kageyama than Karasuno. Are they looking down on us?" "Sounds good," Shuga said. Tanaka and Daichi looked at him shocked. He was Karasuno's official setter. He stood tall. "I want to see Kageyama's improvement as a team." He could tell Daichi and Tanaka didn't like the idea, but he gave one reassuring nod to his captain and started checking over the details. They were dismissed and they all made their way home. On his way Kageyama came up to him telling him how he was going to earn his spot as a setter. Another thing he told him was how he needed to get confidence with the rest of the team. He seemed desperate. His middle school match must have really affected him. But thinking back on it, Shuga could tell Kageyama was a nice kid who just wanted to improve. Asking for help must have been hard for him, and yet he still did. He could already tell some good would come out of it. Just when Hinata thought today couldn't get any better, it got better. The whole team gathered at the nearby market with the scary blonde, and Daichi bought them all meat buns. And they were delicious. He hadn't eaten any real food in a while. Tanaka and Kageyama got mad at him though for not waiting. Hanging out with the team made Hinata feel happy. He didn't exactly have any friends his age. Most of the people he associated with were pro heroes who were mostly focused on their job, and well, he wasn't. Sure, he loved helping people and seeing them happy, but he wanted more. That didn't really work when he had the perfect quirk. He remembers when the war first started. He was 11 and the world was panicking. His sister was still young and his dad had barely survived the attacks. 1 year later Humarise had completed their invasion in Europe and their dome. The government started recruiting every hero they could find and persuading kids to start training as heroes. Hinata may have been young, but he remembers how his dad had tried to push them away. The government didn't know about his family or that he had kids. His dad knew Hinata would be dragged into the system like he was, and he couldn't handle that thought. But Hinata couldn't bear to see his dad alone. He wanted to stand by him as they faced it all. His mom and sister ran away as Hinata and his dad faced the system. Many were shocked when they realized Hawks had a kid, but most were relieved as they called Hinata a future pro-hero with his quirk. And he was good. He was good at fighting and controlling his wings and feathers, but he didn't want to hurt anyone. He just wanted to protect the people he loved with a smile, during these dark times. Hinata sometimes regrets his decision to stay with his father. He wished he could live without the pressure of always having to be better, but he loves his dad, and he loves him. He couldn't leave him alone. And now he misses him. And the rest of his family. The team said their goodbyes, and all went their own separate ways. Hinata smiled all the way home. He had found his crowd in the last place he thought possible. They made him feel special and he could do what he loved. Volleyball. It wasn't until he walked back to his apartment that reality struck. He stood there in the dark, smelly room as his mind reminded him of who he was here. He was an outcast who didn't belong. He refuses to acknowledge the way his eyes stinged. He shouldn't be surprised by the truth. He had a job to do. He needed a plan. No more detours. He had found multiple police stations around the area, but he knew he had to go further to avoid getting tracked back to his apartment. He managed to get a map and found the perfect spot to strike. He didn't want to ghost his new friends, that would look suspicious, so he would wait until next week when they were on their match to go to the police station and steal a radio, maybe even check their computers. For now, he would just be normal. Hinata Shoyo hanging out with his friends practicing normal volleyball. The following week was one of the best weeks Hinata has had in a while. Every day in the afternoon he would show up to see them practice and he would even join in. Kageyama kept pressuring him to keep trying the quick attack and he loved every second of it. They even tried to teach Tanaka, but he was convinced we were crazy with bam and whoosh. Shuga helped him get better at receiving and Daichi kept motivating him to try harder. One day he even managed to sneak into school with a borrowed uniform. Kageyama had called him an idiot and the rest were surprised, asking how he pulled it off. He told them it was a secret. He still worked hard on getting out of the dome, but he would be lying if he said he wasn't having fun or that he wasn't going to miss them all once he left. But he had a job to do, and he wasn't going to give up. The day of the match came and it was time to set his plan in motion. "You sure you don't want to come, Hinata? We got space in the van," asked Shuga and the rest of the team for the 100th time. "Sorry guys, I wish I could believe me, but there are things I have to get done today that I really need to do," he said. It wasn't really a lie. The team looked disappointed and although Hinata felt bad he had to do this. "Besides, I can't play since I'm not part of the team." "Yeah, but who's going to cheer me on when I spike the ball with all my strength?" said Tanaka, fist in his chest. Hinata gave him his best smile. "Come on Tanaka, you're already an amazing spiker, you are going to do great." At that point some of the team members either looked away or shielded their eyes. He wondered why. After a while the team got into the van and drove off. Hinata smiled and waved until they were out of sight and then dropped his hand and his smile. It was time to get serious. He had made a plan a few nights ago and tried to make it as best as he could to avoid conflict. He put on a cap and sunglasses. If this went well, he would be one step closer towards his family, he couldn't mess up. Chapter text. After leaving the bus station Hinata started heading towards the police station he chose to target. He had the map memorized on how to get there and made sure to cover up his face. He kept his head down and let his senses take over to avoid getting attention as much as he could. Hinata continued walking until he saw the station in sight. He moved one step at a time, he was right in front of it and then, he walked by, unfazed, just another civilian taking a stroll. He didn't give any indication that he wanted to go there, instead he made his way to an alley a block away and looked around. His plan was to get on top of the building and then enter through a window clear in sight. He couldn't use his wings to get to the top but thankfully learned to not rely only on his quirk. He adjusted his backpack and took a few steps back as he warmed up. He was pretty good at parkour and the fire escape on the other side would do just the trick to get him on the roof. He ran head first to the wall and jumped, quickly using his feet against the wall to push himself up. His extended arms reached the rails as he swung himself back and forth until he was able to hoist himself over the railing. Hinata climbed the stairs all the way to the roof, but his destination was on the other side. The distance was much shorter than what he normally jumps in training, so this was going to be easy. He ran straight to the ledge and jumped, the familiar feeling of flying filling him up inside. He landed on his feet and rolled to minimize damage. Now for the real mission to begin. It was broad daylight so he had to enter quickly before anyone would notice. He held onto the ledge and lowered himself down, making sure no one was inside what appeared to be an office, and got in through the window as quietly as possible. The room didn't seem to have any cameras around, thankfully. "Okay," he sighed. "Let's do this." The first thing he did was check the computer. Of course it was locked, but after a quick search around the desk he managed to find a notebook under a drawer with the code. He typed it in and got ready to do his research. He quickly figured out that whoever's office this was probably the chief's. The computer had a bunch of documents on a lot of different things, but first he wanted to figure out where he really was. Both the people and culture seemed to resemble that of Japan, but he knew he was somewhere in Europe. He clicked a link that said military support location, and after searching the notebook again he found the code and was presented with a map with multiple bases. He quickly took out his notebook and wrote down whatever seemed useful plus some coordinates. He noticed that the shape of the base's location sort of resembled the shape of, maybe Asia. Why must he beep at school? But it made sense. A big chunk of Asia was taken over shortly after Europe, and while there is no dome there, the people here must think that that's all there is to their world. He zoomed out and sure enough the map didn't show anything else except for an island to the right that was most likely Japan. Take that geography. He zoomed in on Japan and realized that something seemed off. The island, instead of showing the names of cities and towns like in the dome, instead showed words like Sector 1 and 2, Base Delta. Rebel Containment. Hinata jumped. They had lost many heroes throughout the war. Many were presumed dead, but if this map was telling the truth, then those heroes were either being tortured or brainwashed in Japan. He kept searching and wrote as much as he could in his notebook. The town he was in showed that he was near the border of this corrupted state. If what this said was true, then it would take about a 4-hour drive to reach the nearest base and get outside the dome. Hinata almost jumped with success, but froze when he heard the sound of footsteps coming towards the hall. He quickly placed everything where it was, making sure not to raise suspicion, and hid behind the door as it swung open. A tall man walked in, very distracted with his coffee. Hinata grabbed the edge of the door, eyeing the man, and slipped out unnoticed. He made his way to the hall that held zero personality, but was luckily empty. The last thing he needed was to get caught, and unfortunately for him, while he did inherit his dad's quirk, he didn't inherit his quick lying skills. He took a quick breath and swiftly made his way through the halls. He needed one last thing before he left, a radio. Hinata wasn't a hacker by any means, but he should be able to listen to all the cops' routes, which would come in handy. And while he doubted any cops might talk about Humarise over the radio, there was hope that at least one of them would let a thing or two slip through. He went up to the nearest door and waited a second to listen if anyone was inside. After confirming the room was empty, he grabbed the doorknob but quickly found it locked. He let out a barely audible annoyed grunt and went up to the next door in sight. He repeated the process. If he heard anyone inside the room, he quickly turned the corner on the hallway, and if he was sure no one was there, he would try to get in. It seemed, however, that his luck had run out since none of the doors were unlocked. He now found himself on the second floor, previously being on the third, doing the same process. He reached the end of the hallway with all the rooms locked and was about to turn around when he heard footsteps coming his way. Judging by the sound, it looked like 3 people were heading his way. None of the rooms were available, and there were no vents or places for him to hide in. There was only one thing left to do: lie. He felt himself go stiff and willed his feet to stay still as the steps grew louder. Rounding the corner were 2 men and a woman, dressed in uniform with clipboards in hand. Whatever conversation they had going was quickly stopped as they saw him with plain confusion on their faces. "Oh hey little guy," said the woman. "What are you doing back here?" The woman had blonde hair and freckles splashed over her nose. Hee. Hinata laughed sheepishly. All knowledge he had from lying, which was barely any, already thrown out the window. Before he could answer, one of the other guys, a tall man with gelled back black hair, spoke first. "This area is for employees only," he said sternly. Well," started Hinata. "Relax, dude, you're scaring him," said the other guy, which unlike the tall guy had untamed brown curls. "Whatcha doing here, kid?" Well," started Hinata. "Relax, dude, you're scaring him," said the other guy, which unlike the other guy had untamed brown curls. "Whatcha doing here, kid?" "I got lost," was all he said. "Oh, was there no one at the front?" asked the lady. "Don't feel bad, the lady who was stationed there is always taking an insane amount of breaks." The nice man let out a chuckle. "That still doesn't explain why you're here," asked the mean one. Hinata stumbled as he tried to think of a response. He already told them he was lost, so he needed his lie to link with the last one. He could probably tell them that he was new in town and was looking for a convenience store or something, but that might have led to more questions he didn't want to answer. "Well," pushed the man, "I'm waiting." He wasn't familiar with this area. He could probably say something about Karasuno, but that wasn't a very well-known school and it would probably require to be looked up and, wait, school. Kid, I won't. Aoba Josai, he yelled. The trio looked at him confused. You mean the school? Asked the nice man. Hinata nodded tensely. Aoba Josai, he said again, not being able to say anything else at the moment. Yeah, that school isn't far from here, said the lady. My nephew goes there. He's having a volleyball match today. Yeah, against Karasuno. Joined in Hinata. Are you playing too? She asked. No, I don't play. I just want to cheer them on, he said. Now that conversation was shifting towards what he loved, he found himself feeling slightly less tense. Slightly. Ah, that's so sweet, said the nice one of the guys. Cheering on your friends. I'm guessing you go to Karasuno too. Yep, he replied without thinking. Are you lost? Is that why you're here? The lady asked. Hinata gave her a speedy nod. We'll come on, she said, walking through the hall. Let's get you there to cheer them on. Karasuno had lost the first set and were getting ready for the next one. Whatever training Kageyama had done with the team had been useless. Other than that idiot Hinata, no one could pick up with his quick sets, and it took everything in him to not yell at them to move faster. Everyone seemed to miss his presence as well, waiting for his enthusiastic cheer whenever they did, well, anything really. He shook his head. He needed to focus on the match. He refuses to let himself lose his temper again, especially in front of his opponents. One wrong move and they would see that he really was the egocentric king. To make matters worse, one of their teammates twisted his ankle and couldn't play for the second set. Okay everyone, pay attention, said their captain. We are one teammate down and we lost the second set, but we are going to flip the tables on this one. Woo, it's so big, exclaimed a far too energetic voice. They all turned to find a familiar small tangerine bouncing around as he stared at the courts. Hinata, said Shuga with a smile, as he made his way towards him. The rest of the team followed suit, including Kageyama. What are you doing here? Well, you know that thing I told you all I had to do. Well, he started. Kageyama couldn't help but notice how he avoided everyone's eyes. I figured I'd do it later. So I came here to cheer you guys on, but then I got sort of lost. The last bit was whispered but everyone heard it. Idiot, Kageyama yelled at him. I already told you I'm not an idiot, Hinata yelled. And so, their brawl began, again. With Daichi yelling at them to behave, Tanaka cheering because Hinata was here, and Tsukishima giving snarky comments on Hinata's stupidity. All in all, it was a complete mess, and Kageyama, against his better judgment, couldn't help but feel more at ease. Chapter text. Hinata didn't know how he got himself into this situation. He was in the changing room getting ready to play in the second set with the rest of the Karasuno team. Mr. Takeda had had the brilliant idea of putting him in the team, and both sides seemed to agree, Hinata included. It wasn't until now that he realized what he just signed himself up for. He got out and after an extra trip to the bathroom, started to stretch as the second set began. After getting warmed up, he got placed on the court ready to play. And to put in briefly, he was an absolute mess. It wasn't until he hit the back of Kageyama's head that he felt true social fear. Although Hinata has faced many deadlier and scarier villains, he couldn't help but put Kageyama at the top of the list when it came to things that sent shivers down his spine. Hey Hinata. Hinata immediately went stiff at Tanaka's words. You. At that point Hinata just went on his knees, feeling nothing but shame. Are you thinking you have to play well, like the others? He asked him. Hinata kept his head down as he spoke. If I don't, I'll get switched and I won't be able to play anymore. I want to stay till the end of the match. Hey, started Tanaka, standing tall before him. We all know you are a lousy player, with little to no experience. Hinata knew it was true, but it still hurt. We all know this, and yet we still want you here. Besides, it's not like you're alone. In volleyball, everyone on this side of the net is your ally. It doesn't matter how much you beep because we can help as long as you don't slow us down. Your classmates, your senpais. Now call me Tanaka Senpai. Tanaka Senpai, he said, as Tanaka's laughter grew along with Hinata's admiration towards him. Karasuno really was amazing. The match continued, Hinata feeling much better than before. Especially since Kageyama and him were going to try a quick, only for him to miss entirely. But surprisingly he didn't get mad. Hinata couldn't help but feel proud of him. He may still be a social mess but he was improving. They got it on the second try, and as usual it felt amazing. Hinata, Kageyama, called Daichi. The team got into a small circle and put their fists together. 1-2, yeah. They cheered. Woo, exclaimed Hinata, knowing full well that he was visibly shaking with euphoria. The match continued. They saved, they blocked and they spiked. Everyone did, like a perfect machine. Hinata looked down at his palm, it was red and tingling with a slight burning sensation. He loved it. What's the matter, Hinata? Daichi asked. It took Hinata a while to respond. After his rather stressful event, playing volleyball with Karasuno seemed to make all of his troubles disappear. He wasn't the son of a pro hero, he didn't have a job to do, the world wasn't messed up, and nobody expected him to be perfect. They knew he was going to mess up and make mistakes, but they never got angry or disappointed. They still let him play as a part of the team. He gave Daichi a bright smile. I'm just really happy to be given this opportunity. And I'm glad I met a team I can trust. I shouldn't have worried in the first place. He ran back towards the team feeling better by the second. They won the set and it was now moving on to the final set. Hinata was busy yelling, "Victory!" with Tanaka when he heard the girls who were watching their games start squealing. He turned to see what the excitement was about and saw a tall guy talking to the coach. He couldn't get a good view of the guy but he was wearing an Aoba Josai sports jacket. As for the words exchanged he only caught one name, Oikawa. Daichi was sure that he wasn't the only one who noticed Kageyama tense as the setter walked in. It was clear they knew each other. But regardless of that he was proud of Kageyama for keeping his cool and focus on the game. After all, they were 1 point away from defeating the Aoba Josai volleyball team. It wasn't until the captain of the opposing team came into play did he notice his team tense. Oikawa's serve was incredible and insanely strong. Neither Tsukishima nor Hinata could handle their power. It was moments like this that made him wish a certain librero hadn't gotten himself suspended. They lost 1 point and lost the other, one more and they would be in a tie. All right, bring it, he shouted, trying to lose up the tension from both himself and the team. The captain served and Tsukishima was barely able to receive it. The other team got ready to spike but somehow Hinata managed to catch up to the spiker and tap his spike. It didn't stop there. The second he landed he dashed to one side of the court to the other too fast for any of the blockers. Kageyama sent the ball his way and won the final point leaving both teams and the audience shocked. The whole thing left Daichi speechless along with everyone else watching. It really was a shame Hinata wasn't a member of the team. They shook hands with the other team and were now getting ready to leave. "Hinata, do you want to come with us on the van home?" asked Shuga, turning around. "Oh, where'd he go?" "He went to the bathroom," answered Tanaka. "Tanaka, can you get his bag? We need to start heading outside." Daichi asked him. Fine, he said as he grabbed the bag. Tanaka reached for the small and visibly used bag Hinata had brought with him, but he was quickly startled when an odd beeping sound was heard from inside. Tanaka dropped the bag and it fell open. "Tanaka, be careful with his stuff," scolded Shuga. "What the heck is this?" Tanaka wondered. Gaining curiosity, Daichi came closer to the mess Tanaka made. And he had to admit, it was a bit weird. The bag had a crumpled up piece of map with markings over it and a tiny notebook that laid open showing messy handwriting and weird drawings. The weirdest thing however was what looked like a walkie-talkie that was making some weird glitchy noises. "What is this?" Tanaka asked. He reached over the notebook and started looking over it. "Tanaka," exclaimed Shuga as he snatched it away. "You shouldn't be snooping around other people's stuff. Come on, you have to be at least a little curious about this stuff," replied Tanaka. "And why won't this thing shut up?" He grabbed the walkie-talkie and started shaking as it let out a few words. "Unit 12. Station, police." "Police?" asked Shuga. "Is this a police's radio?" "Why would Hinata have that?" said Daichi. "Is it broken? I can't understand anything," Tanaka complained. He waved it around and pushed a button stopping the noise. I think you turned it off, Daichi said. Before they could answer they heard voices coming from the hallway. The match was amazing. You set the ball like bam. And I jumped and hit the ball with a whoosh. They all quickly realized whose energetic voice that belonged to. Tanaka quickly grabbed everything up from the floor and put it back in the bag just as Kageyama and Hinata opened the door. Hey, Hinata came running towards them filled with excitement. Are we leaving already? Yep, answered Tanaka as he gave him his bag while avoiding eye contact. Daichi had to control his face at Tanaka's poor attempt at trying to seem innocent, but luckily Hinata didn't seem to notice a thing. Hinata, do you want to come back to Karasuno with us on the bus? Asked Shuga as they made their way outside. Yeah, I don't want to get lost again, replied Hinata. They rounded the corner and saw a man and a woman in police uniforms walking up and down the curb. They seemed to be looking for something. The woman stood up and turned around, making eye contact with them. Hey, she said, walking towards them. Sorry for the trouble, but are you the Karasuno volleyball team? She had blonde hair and freckles over her face. Yes, we are, answered Daichi, standing up straight. Really? Oh my gosh, we were the ones who helped your classmate, the little ginger guy. She said with a kind smile. Hinata, Shuga asked. Yeah, little guy, kinda nervous, but super sweet. The smile never left her face. Hinata, is this where'd he go? Asked Mr. Takayata. Daichi looked around and sure enough, Hinata had disappeared. Everyone else checked around but no one could find him. Well, it's a good thing he found you guys, said the lady. He really wanted to see his classmates play the match. Classmates, wondered Daichi. Before he could ask anything, he was interrupted by the other officer. Anya, we need to head back, said the guy getting in the car. But I haven't found my radio, replied the lady, apparently named Anya. You probably left it at the station, said the guy. But I didn't, she mumbled. She turned back to them and offered them one last smile. Well, it was nice to meet you, she told us, and with that she got in the car and left. The rest of the team kept looking around for Hinata but couldn't find him. Eventually they assumed that he went home on his own and they all headed to the bus. But something about the earlier conversation bothered him. Hey, Shuga, his friend turned around noticing he had stopped walking. Did you notice that the officer said Hinata was our classmate? Shuga looked at him for a while before answering. He probably said that to avoid explaining his situation with traveling. Yeah, maybe, he mumbled. And the fact that he disappeared when they showed up. Shuga didn't answer, looking down. And the missing radio, continued Daichi. Just a coincidence. Shuga looked up at him with a troubled expression before answering. Hinata has his own life. I'm not really sure why he left when the police showed up, but I'm sure he had a reason. Yeah, you're right, he told him. He told himself that too and tried to believe it, but all the way back to Karasuno he couldn't help but feel like something was off. Hinata wasn't sure what to do. 2 days ago Hinata played with Karasuno on his first ever match and it was better than amazing. But he also ghosted them the second he saw the police officers. He didn't mean to, he just panicked and ran all the way back to his scrappy motel. Not to mention the encounter he had that day left him on edge. 2 days ago, hey, Shrimpy, Hinata was in the hallway heading for the bathroom when he physically flinched at the sound of the nickname. He would be lying if he said he hasn't been called that before, so he immediately knew the nickname was meant for him. He slowly turned around and immediately felt his hands start sweating when he found not only the ace, but also the captain of the team Karasuno had just beaten. So you're the player that can spike Tobio's tosses? The captain asked coolly. Something clicked in Hinata's head and before he could think it through he took a step back, pointed at the captain and yelled, "The Great King." He watched as both the ace and captain tilted their head in confusion before shaking the thought away. You know, for someone your height you're really good at volleyball. You have an impressive jump, the captain mentioned. Thanks, Hinata said, not missing the insult. I haven't seen you before. Oikawa leaned forward causing Hinata to take a step back against his better judgment. You're not even part of Karasuno's team. Iwa-chan here told me you came in just before the start of the second set. Well, yeah, Hinata started. He had a pretty good idea where this conversation would lead to. "So where are you from?" Oikawa's tone seemed cheerful, but Hinata could also see he was curious, and the last thing he could do was give him the truth. "I would have remembered a player like you, so must be from out of town, right?" "Well, I live with my dad and we travel around because of his work." He stuttered, and he hated it. That took him back. "So how did you learn volleyball?" "Great, another lie," he thought. "I'm mostly self-taught." Oikawa narrowed his. There's no way someone, self-taught, could handle Tobio's tosses. He gave him a smug look, but Hinata knew it was meant for Kageyama instead of him. "Kageyama," he said sternly. Oikawa's gaze on him shifted back to open curiosity, but this time Hinata looked at him straight in the eyes without any doubt. "Kageyama is an amazing setter and I know he will only get better from now." The Great King's stare shifted cold, but this Hinata didn't let himself be intimidated. They stayed like that for a while before the ace bumped his shoulder on the captain and gestured towards the end of the hall. Hinata turned as well and found Kageyama standing there. "Tobio," said Oikawa in a cheerful tone, breaking the tension. "I see you finally found someone who can match your tosses. Too bad he's not part of the team." Even from the distance Hinata saw how Kageyama clenched his fists as he looked away. "Come on, the team's waiting for us," said the ace, already walking away. "But Iwa-chan," sulked the Great King. "I still want to talk with my dear former teammate." The ace just grabbed him from the back of his shirt and Hinata took a step back as he dragged him out the hall and out of sight. "So," he said, turning to Kageyama. Kageyama just looked at him for a second before walking away. "Hey," he yelled as hurried to catch up to him, heading towards the gym and back to the team. Present. The whole thing left Hinata with one solid fact. He beeped at keeping a low profile. Aoba Josai is a known school and Oikawa is a known guy, and Hinata was right there making awesome spikes. He let out a loud groan. He didn't mean to attract attention or talk back to the captain, he just got so caught up in the moment that for a second he forgot who he really was and what his life is. But that didn't matter anymore, because once again reality struck and he realized that he really needed to get out of here. And he was going to. He had spent the last 2 days reviewing his notes and listening to the radio. So far everything seemed to be in order. His notes were readable considering his sloppy handwriting, and there were no reports of a short ginger breaking and entering police stations. He just needed a few more days to plan and he should be able to make it to the dome's border to initiate his escape. Hinata casted those ideas away for now. Right now he needed to face his friends and try to explain why he disappeared that day. He slowed his steps as he crossed the street. Friends. Could he even call them that? He was lying to them about everything. But then again he couldn't just tell them the truth. He should probably stop hanging out with them, but that would draw suspicion, not to mention that he really enjoys their company. He just got himself tangled up in an even bigger mess. Someone's watching him. It wasn't exactly uncommon for him, especially in his line of work. He had been trained enough times to realize it. He refused to let his follower notice as he kept walking and amplified his senses. Whoever was following couldn't be the police. They seemed too sloppy at their supposed sneaking, and so far the radio hadn't given any mention of Hinata. He walked a few more steps before turning around, catching his follower mid-step. And he wasn't what he expected. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to appear creepy." The guy started walking closer with a confident grin on his face. "Hey, is your name Hinata by any chance?" he asked. "Oh yes, that's me," Hinata said. Normally he would be worried that someone knew his name, but he was too busy being shocked. This guy was shorter than him. The guy let out a laugh. "I knew it. Ginger hair, brown eyes, the Karasuno team told me all about you." Hinata gasped. "You go to Karasuno? What year?" "I'm in my 2nd year," he said with confidence. Hinata gasped again and almost started crying. "This is the first time I'm taller than someone since elementary school." "Huh," the guy exclaimed angrily. After some frantic apologies and some mild threats, the two quickly settled on a smooth conversation as they made their way to Karasuno. The guy's name was Nishinoya, and so far Hinata thought he was beyond cool. He was the librero in the team. They were talking about volleyball when Nishinoya opened the gym door and they both saw Kageyama starting, what he heard the others call his king serve. Kageyama jumped and smashed the ball as it zoomed down. But it never landed, at least not the way he had expected it to. Before Hinata could think twice, Nishinoya threw his blazer and got into a receiving position. The ball bounced off his arms perfectly, delivering an amazing receive. Hinata stared at him with pure admiration. He flicked his eyes in between Kageyama and Nishinoya. Kageyama seemed shocked as well, but Hinata could see his brows crouch in frustration. Was this guy ever not mad? Nice serve, Kageyama, stated Nishinoya. Pretty powerful. And Hinata couldn't contain his excitement any longer and proceeded to shower Nishinoya with whatever praises and questions that left his mouth. That was so cool. Kageyama sent the ball fast like zoom, but you took off your jacket and dashed there and received it just like bonk, or bamp. Nishinoya looked a bit taken aback at first, but he quickly composed himself, taking it all in with a confident grin. Hinata. He turned around and found the rest of the team by the door. Hey Hinata, yelled Tanaka, where have you been? Before he could answer, Nishinoya spoke up. I found him on the way here. You were right, he is a huge volleyball fan. Hinata felt his face go red in embarrassment. I see you have already met Nishinoya, Shuga said with a smile. It's hard to tell which one of you has the most energy. But Hinata, Shuga's expression shifted to concern. Why did you leave so suddenly after our match with Aoba Josai? Hinata slightly panicked. He kept a straight face and tried to ignore the fact that every nerve in his body was shaking with nervous energy. Not that it's any of our business. Shuga quickly added. We understand that you have your own stuff to deal with and we aren't trying to pry into it, we're just worried. Shuga looked so concerned that it made Hinata feel bad about lying to him, but he quickly calmed himself and started to recite the lie he made specifically for this type of encounter. Sorry, I got so caught up with the match that I completely forgot about a favor my dad had asked me to do. He added a hint of embarrassment to his tone to make it more believable. It was Dachi who answered. It's okay Hinata, like Shuga said, we were just worried. But you know we could have given a ride instead of just running off. At this Hinata stumbled on his words. He completely forgot about that part and hadn't planned a proper response. I guess I just didn't think of that. This time the embarrassment was real. Kageyama rolled his eyes. Of course the idiot can't even think properly. He mumbled. Hey, I told you to stop that. Hinata yelled at him. Stop yelling, idiot, Kageyama shot back. They kept yelling and Hinata could see from the corner of his eye Yamaguchi chuckling as Tsukishima let out a dramatic and annoyed sigh. I already told you, Nishinoya said angrily, stopping both him and Kageyama mid-brawl. If he's not on the team then neither am I. With that he threw his blazer over his shoulder and stormed off. What happened? Asked Hinata. Shuga and Daichi looked at each other and then at him. Well, Shuga started. It took Hinata a while, but eventually he found Nishinoya. Nishinoya, he asked. He found him walking around the school grounds. He stopped walking and turned to look at him. You said your position was of a libero, right? Hinata was trying his best to talk as quietly and as slowly as possible considering the circumstances. Yeah, what about it? He sat down at a bench. It's a position for good receivers like you, plus the captain called the guardian god. This time he couldn't stop the admiration in his tone. Guardian. Nishinoya apparently wasn't aware of the nickname and got flustered by the praise. But I still won't join the team. Damn you, Daichi, he yelled at the sky. Hinata felt his mood go down. You know I'm pretty bad at receiving even though it's one of the most important things for a volleyball player. That seemed to calm Nishinoya down a bit as he gave him his full attention. So please teach me Nishinoya-senpai. For some reason that seemed to break Nishinoya in some way and he even offered him ice cream, quite aggressively. In the end he agreed to teach him but won't be joining the team, which Hinata thought was good enough for the moment. For the remainder of the day Nishinoya tried his best to teach Hinata and the rest of the team his receiving techniques. He was clearly passionate about it and Hinata couldn't stop himself from admiring him more and more. He was awesome. And yet, Hinata had to stop himself from screaming at him. Here he was with the passion, skill and opportunity to do what he loved and he refused to do it. They told him about the issue with their ace but that only made him angrier. This school had two awesome players who had the opportunity and neither of them was taking it. Hinata would do anything to have the chance to play with Karasuno, but he couldn't. It was on his way back to the motel that he decided. Tomorrow he was going to do everything he could to get the libero and ace to join back the team. He already helped Kageyama with his dream and he was going to help them too. And that was a promise. Asahi found himself heading towards the gym without even realizing until he heard the sounds coming from inside. His mind went back to this morning and his weird encounter. Earlier that day, Asahi. He turned around at the sound of his name and had to bend his head down to see a slightly nervous-looking ginger staring at him. "Yeah, that's me, can I help you?" Asahi noticed that he wasn't wearing a uniform and instead wore black clothing to sort of resemble it. Weird, he thought. The ginger took a deep breath before explaining everything to him in a big, fat dump. His name was Hinata and apparently he had become friends with the volleyball team and heard about his time as the ace and was very passionate and loud about him wanting to come back to the team. Before Asahi could even begin to calm him down, someone else popped in. "Hey, what's with all the noise?" "Kageyama," exclaimed Hinata. Kageyama came up to them and looked at Asahi and he could practically see the way his brain pieced the situation together and understood what was happening. After a quick introduction, Asahi was left with the two of them waiting for his answer. "Listen," he sighed. "I appreciate the sentiment, I really do." Asahi meant that part. He could really tell that Hinata wanted him to go back with the team. "But I can no longer visualize spiking past high blocks in front of me." He could still see the impenetrable wall that blocked his view. "It's a whole spiral of negative thoughts in my head that I just can't seem to shut down." He saw Hinata calm down and even saw a bit of guilt in his eyes. This might seem a little cocky from someone who's not even on a team. "I won't think that," he reassured him. "What is it?" It took him a second before he gave his answer. "I wish I knew what that felt like." That took him by surprise, and Kageyama too. Asahi knew the feeling of failing over and over again. Why would he want to know that awful feeling? "I'm short and don't really have any technique, so I'm constantly getting blocked. And that's mostly in practice. My first match was a complete disaster with every sort of mistake." Kageyama kept nodding next to him but Hinata didn't seem to notice. "But I still remember the points I made with the help of Kageyama as my setter. I jumped and the view of the other side was wide open, free from the blockers, and that's one of the best views there is. I know that feeling well. And at the highest point the ball hits my hand and I feel the sting in my palm. I love it. I know that feeling well. I envy you, Asahi. I don't have the height or power to spike like you. I don't even have the opportunity." Hinata whispered the last bit, leaving him and Kageyama with confused expressions. "But you do, Asahi. Maybe they blocked a lot of your spikes, but I bet you also made a bunch of points. That's why you are Karasuno's ace." "Ace?" Asahi stared at Hinata for a long while as he refused to even blink. It was Kageyama who had to drag him away so he could get to his next class. Present. So there he was. He couldn't help himself. He walked forward and took a peek. One more. He got there just in time to see Hinata jump in the air as Kageyama set the ball for him. He looked like he was flying as the sound of the ball hitting the ground echoed in the gym. "I know that feeling well." Chapter text. After his quick practice with Kageyama, Hinata made up an excuse and quickly left the gym. He didn't want to leave, but it was getting too dangerous for all of them. The police incident wasn't something he could take lightly, and as much as he wanted to, he couldn't stay with the team. He is aware, unlike them. They don't know what's going on, what he has seen, and fought, and sometimes just to stay alive. He got to the hotel and grabbed the radio and notebook. He needed to get out of this dome. So far the radio hasn't been that helpful. Most of the times the reports are for petty crimes around the area or drunk people out at night. But it did serve one purpose. Patrols. Most of the police officers use their radio to report their location and IDs. If Hinata could memorize their routines, he might be able to enter a station without getting caught. The room was too smelly for his liking, but he also didn't want to be around that many people, so he decided that the roof was probably the best place to get to work. He started jotting down as much as he could on his notebook. It wasn't the best plan considering how his last break-in went, but he needed as much information as he could get for the HSPC. The sun started setting and Hinata took a deep breath, enjoying the sound of the wind and trying to ignore the static of the radio. "What am I going to do?" he told himself. "We got a drunk driver on North Road Street. Over." He couldn't just ghost his new friends, although that seemed like the best and safest option. Unit 12, do you copy? He really likes spending time with them, but he also doesn't want to tangle them into this mess. How he wished things were more simple, more peaceful. "Everything is smooth here but you. Over. It hurts," he mumbled. "Has anyone gotten reports for a small ginger kid?" "What?" Hinata whipped his head towards the radio. "Is this another missing kid file?" "Not really, we have just been told to keep an eye out for one." No. Hinata felt his nerves spike up. Said to be around 155 centimeters tall, ginger hair. "So just keep an eye out. Over." Hinata stared at the now silent radio, too distraught to even get angry at the comment on his height. They knew he was here. Okay. Try not to panic. At least now he knows that the police aren't that well aware of the outside world. It's clear they got orders to get him, but there was no reason as to why. Hinata got on his feet and started pacing around. He knows their patrol routes, so as long as he stays away from them he should be okay. Besides, he's been specially trained for this. He can avoid a few cops who aren't aware of a secret war that he, a kid, has been fighting for years. Sure, he doesn't have his quirk, but that does not change the fact that he can still defend himself. He's okay. He's okay. Okay. AAARGH. Hinata snatched a black hoodie he brought up, aggressively put it on and ran towards the edge of the building. He ran as fast as he could and jumped on the edge. Just because he doesn't have his wings doesn't mean he can't jump really high, and besides, parkour was a cool way to let out some steam. With every jump he felt his breathing grow more tired and even felt like crying at some point. Every time he jumped he felt his body deny gravity and his stomach did funny twirls, making him want to grin like a maniac. But that feeling was replaced when he started falling. Over and over, he kept jumping and kept falling. A constant reminder of what he couldn't do. What this place had done to him. It wasn't all bad though. In the outside world, people took one look at his wings and immediately assumed they were safe. A future hero in the making, carrying out Hawk's legacy, they said. Hinata didn't like it. He still loves his quirk. It's a part of him. And he doesn't blame his dad. He was the one that showed him how to use his wings and gave him his love to fly high. But with an amazing quirk came consequences and expectations. Here in this world, however, he was just another kid in the crowd. A kid who was trying to hide to save himself. A kid who has seen and endured so much, and no matter how much he tried he knew he could never fit in this world without feeling empty inside. "I could never enjoy this, not as long as the war continues," he told himself. He kept jumping from one building to the other, refusing to let himself stop. It wasn't until 20 minutes later that he laid flat on his back on top of a building, gasping for air as the sun started setting next to a terrified Hinata. He stayed there for a couple of minutes debating what to do. He could feel his eyes sting with tears. "Don't cry," he told himself as he got up and made his way down to the street. He looked around the area, making sure he wasn't anywhere near the police's regular drives. After that he just walked. He didn't know where. His head was too busy with worry for him to care. "They're better off without me." And it was true, the volleyball team was. They were away from the unknown war, safer and less worried. "I have to stay away for their own safety and mine." Hinata was going to miss them, all of them, even Tsukishima. But things were better this way, he knew. Hinata. Hinata felt himself flinch at the sound of his name. He has been doing that a lot recently. But he recognized the person's voice. He lifted his head up and saw Daichi in front of him. "Hinata, what are you doing out here by yourself? It's late." "Oh well, he fumbled. "I could ask you the same thing." Daichi pointed towards the way he came. "I'm staying at the training camp with the rest of the team to get ready for our match against Nakoma." "Nakoma? You mean the team who was one of Karasuno's greatest rivals?" He couldn't keep the excitement down, even if it was much quieter than usual. "Yeah, you should stop by and say hi," said Daichi with a sincere smile. Hinata froze. He promised himself to not get involved with them anymore. He needed to end this. Maybe he could tell Daichi that his fake dad and him were moving, and he could tell the rest of the team. It felt wrong, but he had to end it somehow, and he couldn't bring himself to say it to the whole team. Daichi, I don't, he started before getting interrupted. Daichi. They both turned towards the sound of the voice and found Kageyama coming their way. Dang it, can't the universe just let me end my friendships in peace? Hinata, what are you doing here? You're going to get lost again. He said. Do you have to say all those things about me? I'm just telling the truth. Kageyama replied matter-of-factly. Hinata gasped, visibly offended. What is it, Kageyama? Asked Daichi. The team told me to come get you from your walk to tell you that the food's ready. He told him, ignoring Hinata. Oh sure, let's get going. Wanna join, Hinata? Daichi turned towards him with that same smile. Hinata had to process the question before answering. Me? Who else would he be talking to? Snapped Kageyama. Hey, I'm just making sure since I'm not part of the team. The last part came out sadder than he intended. Kageyama's face softened just a little bit before he spoke again. Well, you insist on coming to all of our practices and even helped us win against Oikawa. And by the way, I still haven't forgotten what you did to the back of my head. The last part sent Hinata's body on a whole shiver. Besides, he continued, avoiding eye contact. You're the only one who can make that weird quick, and I need your help to show the others how to do it. Hinata was left slightly speechless for a second, but then his mouth turned to a mischievous grin. You need my help? He asked. Kageyama's face scrunched back to its regular angry self. I don't need your help, you're just the only one dumb enough to jump and spike with your eyes closed. But you still need me, Bakayama. Hinata couldn't help but laugh at the new nickname he gave the setter. Shut up. Hinata hadn't realized it then, but he subconsciously followed Daichi as he walked back to the training camp while still fighting with Kageyama. It wasn't until Daichi led them to a room filled with the rest of the team did Hinata realize what he got himself into. Hey everyone, I found Hinata, announced Daichi. Everyone stopped what they were doing and greeted him with happy waves and smiles. There was one person, however, who caught his eye, Asahi. He was with the team. Hinata couldn't help a soft smile from coming to his face. A few of the people there noticed and looked at him with slight concern. Sure, the smile was a sight for sore eyes, but it wasn't his usual sunshine and energetic smile. It looked sad and tired. Hinata, asked Shuga, are you feeling okay? Hinata snapped out of his thoughts. I'm fine, just tired I guess. Tired, yelled Tanaka. Then allow us to bless you with Kyoko's heavenly food. Without waiting for Hinata to answer, Nishinoya dragged Hinata towards the table and placed the most delicious-looking food in front of him. Wow, can I really eat this? Hinata's mouth started drooling. It has been a while since he ate a proper meal. Of course, we have more than enough, reassured Shuga. He didn't even get the chance to finish before Hinata started stuffing his mouth with food. Shuga laughed, Tanaka and Nishinoya cheered, and Tsukishima rolled his eyes. Kageyama even challenged him to see who could eat rice the fastest, which left both of them nearly choking to death. The rest of the meal was filled with cheers and laughs, and Hinata couldn't help but keep a genuine sunshine smile on his face the entire time. When Shuga told Kageyama to go get Daichi for dinner, he hadn't expected to find Hinata with him. And without even meaning to, he had somehow dragged Hinata back with the rest of the team to eat. There was something about Hinata that left Kageyama feeling weird. After all, he was the first person who was able to receive his tosses without much issues and more on instinct. No matter how much he refused to admit it, his time in middle school had really affected him. He was a horrible teammate and an egotistic setter. But by the time he threw the ball and saw that there was no one there, it was already too late. And yet, even after all the petty fights with Hinata, the ginger still talked to him and still asked him to set for him. Maybe he was just too stubborn or desperate. Sadly, Hinata wasn't part of the team, but if he could somehow get Hinata to teach the others to spike the same way he did, then maybe things could actually turn out okay. Heck, he might even make some friends. The problem now was that Hinata was nowhere to be seen. Last time he saw him was when he excused himself to go to the bathroom after almost choking on his food. Shuga must have noticed him looking for something and came to ask what it was. Just looking for the idiot Hinata. Need to ask him something. He replied bluntly. Well, last I saw him he went to the bathroom, right? Come on, let's go check. Shuga laid down his plate and motioned to Kageyama to follow him, which he did. They left the loud room and walked the hall in silence with nothing but the muffled sounds from the previous room to fill the air. Shuga opened the door for the restrooms and found Tsukishima near the sink washing his hands. Kageyama couldn't help but twist his face in disgust. Of the people he could bump into, it had to be this guy. Hello, Tsukishima, greeted Shuga, to which the taller guy gave a short nod. We were just looking for Hinata. Have you seen him? Hinata. One of the stalls opened and out came Yamaguchi as he headed towards the sink. We saw him on our way here. He was climbing up the stairs, probably heading to the rooftop. Rooftop. Wouldn't be surprised if Shrimpy got lost again, Tsukishima said with a grin. Shuga ignored Tsukishima's unnecessary comment and gave a quick thanks before they both started heading towards the stairs. But Kageyama heard some extra footsteps following them. Don't you have somewhere else to be? He turned around and glared at Yamaguchi and Tsukishima. Yamaguchi just gave him an embarrassed smile before answering. I just thought it would be nice to take a small detour before going back with the others. And besides, added Tsukishima, I kinda want to know what the Shrimpy is up to. He's a bit weird, don't you think? As much as it pained Kageyama, he had to agree with the guy. Not only did Hinata have too much energy, but he was also so random on occasions and did things without any logic. They didn't even know much about him or his life, except for his love for volleyball, and yet everyone somehow managed to become great friends with him. Not only that, but the team was still a little suspicious about Hinata's sudden appearance and disappearance during their previous match. He was just hard to read. Or maybe he was just an idiot. Kageyama grabbed the doorknob and opened the door towards the roof, but he was not ready for what he saw when he looked up. All the food along with his heart felt like it had plumed down in his stomach when he saw Hinata. He was standing on top of the very thin railing, clearly lost in thought as he swayed on the tips of his feet, back and forth. One wrong step and he would fall and maybe even die. Kageyama, Hinata asked, now looking at him, eyes focused. What are you doing here? Kageyama felt his face freeze and his muscles tense up. He couldn't bring himself to speak. Thankfully Shuga, being the oldest, quickly took charge of the situation. Hinata, get down from the railing. He could sense the fear in his voice and noticed both Tsukishima and Yamaguchi had expressions of shock and horror on their faces. Now, Hinata turned his body towards them, in a way someone should never do when they are standing on a railing, and tilted his head to the side, completely oblivious to their panic. Kageyama still had his hand on the doorknob and squeezed it tight, trying to stay calm. Hinata, please. Before Shuga could finish, Hinata jumped down and landed on the railing, now in a seated position, dangling his feet back and forth with his hands in his pockets. Kageyama nearly had a heart attack, and he even heard Tsukishima let out a few cuss words as he massaged his forehead. Please don't do that again, sighed Shuga, who looked ready to faint. The ginger still looked confused and narrowed his eyes until finally some sense dawned to him and he started to panic and apologize. I'm so sorry, I swear this is not what it looks like. Hinata finally got off the railing and started furiously bowing at them. It was dark outside, but Kageyama could still see the way his face tinted pink from embarrassment. I went out looking for the bathroom but then got lost, so I climbed up the stairs not knowing where else to go, and I wound up here. I swear I only came here to see the night sky. The moon is always so pretty and I love looking at the stars. Hinata's face shifted as he looked up at them with an unsure expression. He turned around and whipped his face up towards the sky, looking at nothing except the dark the night provided. What had the idiot said? Stars. Kageyama mumbled the word in his mouth and felt a weird wave of, what was it? He couldn't really place the feeling. The word didn't sound made up. In fact, he had heard before, or at least he thinks he has. Stars. Kageyama mumbled again. Hinata? Asked Yamaguchi as he attempted to get closer. Oh. Hinata turned back at them and Kageyama saw that his eyes looked sort of glassy. Sorry. Hinata gave them an awkward smile. Tsukishima walked up with a grim expression. You mind explaining what the heck was that? he said, making it sound like an insult. Kageyama didn't miss the way Hinata's eyes went wide in panic before they shifted to shame. Like I said, I stumbled up here and lost track of time, he said softly. That still doesn't explain why you were on the railing, Kageyama added angrily. He meant it in a way that showed concern, but it didn't come out that way. I'm sorry, my dad taught me parkour when I was younger, so I know how to manage on tall buildings, just so you guys know I was safe doing, that. I guess I just kinda miss him. He avoided eye contact with anyone and talked the slowest he had since they met him. Didn't you say you lived with your dad? Asked Shuga with concern. Hinata's eyes quickly looked away as he started swaying on his feet. No, yeah, I did say that, didn't I? What I mean is that we haven't been as close as before, with his job and always moving, I guess. His words had started mixed with panic but slowly shifted into a more sad tone. It was weird seeing him looking so down when most of the time he was bouncing off the walls with happy energy. Shuga walked up to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. It's all right, Hinata, he told him. Just tell us next time instead of giving us a heart attack. Please. Hinata looked up at him with a small smile and a quick nod. Kageyama was sort of expecting that response. What he didn't expect was for Hinata to get down and lay on his back on the floor as he stared up at the sky. The team looked at him with confusion, but Hinata didn't seem to mind, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Kageyama looked up at whatever Hinata was looking at. The word stars was still on his mind and he wanted to know what the idiot found so interesting about the dark abyss. So without giving in much thought, Kageyama laid next to Hinata flat on his back looking up, ignoring the weird looks. Shortly after, Shuga also got down, followed by Yamaguchi. Tsukishima didn't lay down, but he did sit down next to Yamaguchi. They all laid there for a while staring at the night with nothing but the wind to fill the silence. It was Hinata who spoke first. Do guys ever feel like there's something missing up there? Kageyama's first instinct was to tell him to shut up and call him an idiot, but he didn't. Instead he looked back up and realized he was right. It did look like something was missing, but what? He looked at his peers. Hinata still stared at the sky and he couldn't really see his face. Shuga and Yamaguchi looked like they were about to say something but stopped themselves. Even Tsukishima stared up with a mixed expression. They stayed there for a couple of more minutes in silence, before Shuga spoke up. We should probably get back with the others. He sighed. He was greeted by a round of nods before they all got up, heading back towards the stairs. Kageyama saw Hinata rub his eyes. Was he crying? Kageyama shook his head. It was none of his business, and kept walking. Shuga. The words were barely a whisper, but it carried on through the night. Hinata stood a few steps apart from the group. His face was down so Kageyama couldn't see his expression, but he heard the slight shudder in his voice as he spoke. Could I stay here? Just for tonight, please? Kageyama stiffed a little at his words and he noticed he wasn't the only one. Standing in front of them, Hinata looked like a lost child. Head down, fists balled up in desperation, waiting for a response and wishing it to be yes. The ginger was definitely more than what meets the eye. There was no telling what he would do next. Well, Shuga rubbed the back of his head as he thought of an answer. I already told my dad, Hinata said quickly, lifting his head up. He said it was fine, but I had to ask for permission. And that's when the group realized something on Hinata's face. On the left side of his cheek stood the trail of a dried-up tear as he looked up at Shuga with anticipation in his eyes. No one said anything and Shuga let out a sigh as he caved in. I don't see a problem with that, but we should probably ask an adult first. They are already familiar with you, so they'll probably say yes. Shuga stepped closer and softly placed his hand on Hinata's shoulder, and the shrimp seemed to relax a little as they all made their way downstairs where the rest of the team was waiting. No one said anything when they got back, and Kageyama had no intention of doing it either. Besides, it wasn't like he had anyone to talk to. He suspected that Shuga would probably tell the captain, but he chose to let that feeling go. He watched from a distance as Hinata talked with Nishinoya and Tanaka. The sad expression he had on the roof was gone, now replaced with his perfect ear-to-ear smile. Just who is this guy? Kageyama thought. Chapter text. Shuga didn't fail to notice how Hinata managed to shift his expression the second they entered the room. As soon as Tanaka and Nishinoya saw Hinata, Hinata's face showed a huge smile and they all quickly started a conversation with a lot of enthusiasm. Shuga was concerned to say the least. Something was clearly going on with Hinata, but it's not like he could just interrogate him for answers. He hardly talked about himself to the point where they knew almost nothing about his life and he didn't want to make the ginger feel uncomfortable. He also didn't fail to notice the way Kageyama was looking at Hinata, probably with all the same thoughts he had racing through his mind. Shuga let out yet another tired sigh. He really wanted to help Hinata, but to do that he had to trust Shuga. First things first, convince the teachers to let Hinata stay. Both adults were skeptical at first about letting Hinata stay there, considering that they weren't sure if Hinata's dad had really given him permission. But after reassuring them that he did have permission and not to mention how late it was, they said yes. It wouldn't be safe to walk alone at this hour, his teacher commented, looking out the window. Coach Ukai rubbed his eyes tiredly. My first day and I already have a stowaway. He sighed. Trust me, coach, Hinata is an interesting one, reassured Shuga. I can see that, his coach answered. He gestured towards the team. I have heard the team talk about him. A lot. Well, yes, but I meant in the court, Shuga corrected. Coach Ukai raised his eyebrows with interest. The kid plays. Not exactly, but I have a feeling you'll like what you see, Shuga explained, trying to hide a small grin from his face. He still remembers the shock on everyone's face when they saw Hinata and Kageyama in action. Their new coach was definitely in for a surprise. Guess we'll see, the coach said with clear interest. Those last words ended the conversation and soon they were all heading to bed. Except for Shuga, he had to talk with his captain. Daichi. Daichi was about to enter the room before Shuga had called him. There's something I need to tell you, he said. Daichi immediately noticed his tone and asked him to explain. Shuga gave him the whole rundown with his encounter with Hinata on the roof and the way he saw him tear up as he asked to stay here. After finishing it all, Daichi leaned his back to the wall and let out a long sigh. Yeah, whispered Shuga. He could understand the exhaustion. Hinata was a nice guy, but there were just too many things about him that didn't add up. He appeared seemingly out of nowhere, bonding with the team so quickly, and yet they hardly knew anything about him other than his love for volleyball. Hinata said he had a dad that was constantly traveling, but that was by far all they knew. He didn't own a phone and he kept making excuses whenever anyone asked for his email. He wore what looked like used clothes and seemed a bit skinny, not to mention the way he gobbled up today's food like he hadn't eaten all day. And then there was his appearance during their last match. At first everyone was just happy to see him, and who wouldn't, but saying he got lost when they were so far from Karasuno brought up some questions. The radio and notebook they found on his bag were still in his head and he could tell Daichi was thinking of it as well. The police officers just added more questions. Hinata had seemed happy with the idea of getting a ride back to Karasuno, but as soon as the cops came into view he just vanished. Just as the cops were talking about a missing radio. Putting it all together like that made Hinata much more of a mystery than he already was. You said he's staying the night, right? Daichi asked, lifting his head up. Shuga gave him a short nod. Well, let's keep an eye on him. We don't know what's up with him, but let's just make sure that he's okay. Daichi gave him a reassuring smile and turned to leave, but Shuga had one more thing to say. Do you think Hinata might have run away from his home? The thought had been on his head for a while, but it was the first time he had actually said it out loud. Daichi looked down, avoiding his gaze. I don't know, he said. Hinata is a nice kid, but we don't know much about him. He looked up, with determination in his eyes and a promising smile. So like I said, let's make sure he's okay. If we see anything at all that might give us a sign that he needs help, we will give it to him. Shuga looked at his captain for a bit before he gave him a confident smile. They were going to do their best to help Hinata with whatever problem he had, no matter what it was. The next day Shuga was impressed when he heard that both Kageyama and Hinata had gone on an early jog that morning. Not to mention that Hinata still managed to run fast enough to get lost. Luckily Shuga was able to find and led him back to the training camp. I saw a guy back there who was a volleyball player, mentioned Hinata. They were jogging at a comfortable speed as they passed green fields. It really is amazing just how many people can like it. Shuga looked at Hinata closely. If he played his cards right, he might be able to get Hinata to open himself up a bit. It made him feel kinda bad, but he really wanted to help and this was the only way. You said you traveled a lot, right? Did you never find other people that liked volleyball? It took Hinata a while to respond as he looked down. Not really. Everyone was always. He paused and slowed his pace as he tried to figure out the right word. Busy. Shuga could tell that wasn't the right word and the topic seemed to have brought Hinata's mood down. Maybe Hinata's constant moving never let him make any connections with friends. Before Shuga could answer, Hinata came to a complete stop. That's why I have to do the best I can with this opportunity. I'm so happy that you guys let me practice with the team. Hinata looked at Shuga with a determined look in his eyes, but Shuga saw something else, loneliness and sadness. There was definitely something behind what Hinata had just said, but before he could say anything Hinata jumped up, high with a grin on his face. So come. The rest of the team is probably waiting for us to start. And with that he dashed away, leaving Shuga to chase after him. Hinata, you're gonna get lost again, he yelled, although he doubted he was heard. After practicing all day, the team had another amazing meal to eat. Just like last time, Hinata and Kageyama ate the most as fast as possible, leaving Tsukishima and Yamaguchi with baffled expressions. That night Shuga stayed up late making plans to improve the team's positions. He even wrote down some things he knew about Hinata. He seemed to be enjoying his stay here, and although Shuga still didn't know much about him, that put his mind at ease, at least for now. Day 2 of training came, where they talked about positions for the match. Since Hinata wasn't part of the team, he mostly stayed on the sidelines watching with big bright eyes filled with wonder. On the third day their uniforms came. Wow, your uniforms are so cool. As expected, Hinata was ecstatic watching them all in uniforms even though he didn't have one. You guys are going against Nakoma, right? He received a round of nods. That's so cool, and they are like your biggest rivals. In the past, yes, answered the coach, drawing the others' attention. But it has been years since Karasuno and Nakoma have had an official match. The coach let what he said linger in the air, reminding them who they were up against. Well, said Hinata, you all must be super excited to play against them, right? Reliving those awesome moments and awesome matches both teams have had. I just know you guys are going to give it your all and win, with how hard you have been training. The team stared at Hinata for a while, still surprised on the way he managed to find the excitement in everything and determination to keep moving forward. Heck yeah, yelled Nishinoya, followed by Tanaka. Soon the whole team was smiling with a new perspective on what was to come. Hinata sat on the railing on the rooftop, dangling his feet and munching on some chips. The coach had let them take a snack break near the end of the day. He probably wanted them to calm down, but it only left Hinata alone with his thoughts. Whenever he wasn't having fun with the team or didn't have a volleyball in his hand, reality would hit him like a truck, and with that came guilt. It has been happening way too much these past few days. Guilt that he was lying to his friends. Guilt that he was using them so he wouldn't get caught by the police. Guilt that he was using all of their kindness and generosity to distract himself from how lost and helpless he felt. I'll leave after the match with Nakoma, he told himself. He didn't want to, but he had to leave eventually. He just had to tell them that he and his fake dad were moving again. More lies. Hinata let out an irritated sigh. He had to leave to avoid bringing danger to the team, even if that meant lying. He got down from the railing and started heading towards the door, back indoors. Coach Ukai would be calling them in a few minutes and he didn't want to be late, plus he was really thirsty. He was about to open the door when he heard someone's voice from inside. Hinata recognized Shuga's voice quickly. What's he doing up here? He thought. He was about to grab the doorknob when he heard a second voice. This one harder to recognize but still noticeable. Daichi. So anything new from Hinata? Those words made Hinata's whole body stiff. The footsteps came closer and without giving it a second thought he hid before the door opened as the 2 third-years walked out, both being none the wiser that Hinata was there listening to everything they were about to say. Chapter text. So anything new from Hinata? Daichi said, heading straight to the point. Shuga had brought Daichi up to the rooftop to get some privacy for their conversation. Well, the most I have gotten out of him was when we were coming back from our run yesterday. Recalled Shuga. He talked about how he really enjoyed training with us and how we all liked volleyball. How we like volleyball? Asked Daichi with a raised eyebrow. Yeah, I'm not really sure what he meant by that, but when I asked him about it he just said how everyone he knew was always. He fumbled in the word, remembering the way Hinata had said it. He had the feeling that Hinata meant a different word but changed it last minute. Busy. He finished. Daichi looked down as he processed what had been said and how. What do you think he meant by that? Well, I'm pretty sure he meant something else, but more than that he seemed, I don't know, sad. You know, it worries me. Daichi turned and walked closer to the railing. What does? Shuga asked as he followed behind. Daichi let out a sigh and leaned his elbows on the railing. The way that he can switch up so easily. You said it yourself. One second he's on this rooftop looking desperate and alone, and the next he is bouncing with energy across the halls. He let the thought sink in and Shuga had to agree with him, it was concerning. Did I tell you how I found Hinata before the training camp? He asked Shuga. Shuga slowly shook his head. Well, I was on my walk, minding my own business when I saw him in the distance. At first I couldn't tell it was him with the oversized hoodie he had, but when he got closer I recognized him. I had to call his name 3 times before he finally answered. And once he realized I was calling him he flinched. Daichi looked Shuga in the eye. And I don't mean the usual flinch he does when he's embarrassed or when Kageyama insults him, no. This was a full-body flinch. He looked scared and ready to run away. Shuga beeped in a breath, not breaking away from the stare. What do you think it means? Too many scenarios had already been in Shuga's head about Hinata's situation, and he hated to admit it, but most of them weren't pleasant. He was really starting to worry. I don't know. Daichi rubbed his forehead, clearly stressed. But one thing's for sure, something's up with Hinata and it worries me. He could be dealing with some stuff at home, or maybe you're right and he did run away. Either way, let's keep a close eye on him. If we see something that might suggest he's in danger, we tell an adult. Shuga gave him a determined nod. He didn't like the idea and he could tell Daichi didn't either, but what other choice did they have? On one hand, he didn't want to betray Hinata's trust, but if Hinata was really in trouble or dealing with something, he wanted to help. Do you think we should tell anyone else? He looked down at his watch, noticing it was almost time for practice again. He started heading back towards the door with Daichi following him. Tanaka and Nishinoya are pretty fond of him, but I don't think they could keep a secret. Especially one like this. Best if we keep this between us for now, but you're right, they do care about Hinata, we all do. Daichi closed the door as they walked down the stairs, but there was one last thing Shuga wanted to mention. Do you? Shuga struggled with the question. He turned around and looked up at his captain. He tried again. This is a weird question, but, do you ever think that there's something, I don't know, missing in the night sky? He saw Daichi's face shift to confusion as he opened his mouth to respond, except nothing came out. His face softened and his mouth was left open, whatever question he was going to say gone. Shuga couldn't help but wonder if he had made the same expression when Hinata had asked him the same thing. Shuga continued. Hinata asked us that the first night and it has been bugging me ever since. What do you think it means? Daichi opened his mouth again but no words came out. Instead he looked down confused and mumbled. I'm not sure. They stayed like that for a minute before Shuga turned and started walking downstairs with Daichi next to him. Yeah, he whispered. Me too. Hinata messed up. He had messed up many things before, like homework, or his bedding, but this time he really messed up. He wasn't his dad. He couldn't mask his emotions with a confident grin and lie naturally. No, he let his feelings get in the way, and doing so he placed himself and the people he cared about in danger. They knew Hinata was hiding something, and with his terrible lying skills it's only a matter of time before they start meddling and potentially risk their lives. He had to do something fast. He opened the door and started heading down the stairs. He had to leave, but if he left suddenly that would just raise even more questions, or even concern. The halls were quiet as he walked around. Everyone must be in the court practicing as usual before getting dinner and going to bed. No, stop thinking about volleyball. Your life is in danger, focus. He kept marching down the halls with no particular destination as his mind wandered. He could tell the team that his dad had called him, but he didn't have a phone as far as the team knew. He could just say that he felt bad for overstaying his visit, but the team would probably just tell him not to worry about and that he could stay for as long as he pleased. The best idea was to wait for tomorrow. If he played his cards right, he could sneak out during the match. Maybe he could even leave them a note with a fake explanation for his disappearance. Hinata felt a shiver down his spine. He froze. The shiver wasn't nerves, it was an actual thing that was sliding down his back slowly. It slipped off his shirt and brushed his thighs before landing softly behind his shoes. Hinata knew what it was before he even turned. His feather. When Hinata first arrived here, he had lost his wings and couldn't grow them back due to the drug in the air that cancelled his quirk. The only thing he had left were 3 jet black feathers on his back, the only remains of his quirk, and one had just fallen off. He felt a shudder on his spine, and without giving it a second thought he dashed towards the nearest bathroom. Once there, he took his shirt off and turned his back towards the mirror. One of his feathers was on his shirt, probably fell when he took it off. And there stood one last feather on his back, barely clinging on. Hinata felt a small pinch before the last feather fell off his back. He quickly turned around and caught it before it hit the ground. No, he thought. He stared at the feather, the last thing that remained of who he had been and what he had lost. Hinata felt like tearing up. He was officially quirkless. Not that there was anything wrong with it, but he felt so vulnerable, so unlike himself. He rubbed his thumb over the black feather, feeling how soft it was yet somehow still a weapon. That's when he started to wonder. Would he ever get his wings back? He remembers the weight of his wings in his back. How soft and fluffy his feathers were. How he would sometimes use them to play tricks on his sister or some of the nicer heroes during patrols. Would he ever feel like that again? But most importantly, flying. Would he ever fly again? Hinata didn't know how long he stayed there, kneeling on the floor, but his thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Hinata flinched as he shoved his feather in his pocket. "Hinata, are you in there?" It was Kyoko. "We're all waiting for you at the court. Practice started 20 minutes ago." Asahi quickly walked down the hall as he made his way back to the gym. He had accidentally left his water bottle in the dining room and managed to convince Kochukai to go back and get it. As he turned the corner, he saw Kyoko standing in the middle of the hall looking at her watch. She looked up and gave him a silent wave. "Kyoko," Asahi started as he walked closer. "What are you doing here?" Kyoko gently pointed at the bathroom to her left. "I was told to come and get Hinata for practice. Could you take him there once he's done? Daichi's worried he might get lost again." Asahi gave her an embarrassed smile and completely understood why their captain would have thought that. "Sure, no problem." With that, Kyoko gave him a small nod and walked away. Asahi watched her leave before he remembered about the task in hand regarding Hinata in the bathroom. He reached his hand towards the handle, but it seemed like Hinata beat him to it. The door swung open and there stood Hinata with his face down. "Oh, Hinata," he said. Hinata looked up at him, just realizing he was there. "Asahi." It was then that Asahi noticed 2 things about Hinata. 1. His face was wet. He guessed that Hinata probably washed his face in the sink. And 2. Hinata looked very pale. "Hinata," he started. "Are you feeling okay?" Hinata gave him a smile, but it didn't fully reach his eyes and looked too forced. "I'm fine, but we should probably head to the gym now." Hinata moved past Asahi and walked in front of him. Asahi also noticed how slowly Hinata was walking. There was no sprint in his step and no conversations filling the air. He couldn't see his face and he was worried if the paleness he had seen in the bathroom had been in his head or if it was real. It was probably just the lighting. He told himself. There was no need to worry, Hinata was fine, the lighting was just off. By the time they made it to the gym, Asahi's theory about the bad lighting was definitely wrong. Hinata seemed paler than before and he could have sworn he saw him shudder underneath his jacket. Hinata grabbed the gym door and was about to go in. "Hi Hinata," Asahi quickly stuttered. If you're not feeling okay, we could tell the coach. If you want, of course. Maybe we could even get your dad so he could. Asahi didn't fail to notice how Hinata's body stiffened at the mention of his dad. Something wasn't right here. Before he could say anything else, they were spotted by Kageyama. Hinata, why were you late? We have to show the others how to do the quick. Hinata didn't turn around. Instead he stayed there with his head facing down. Coming, Hinata said, spinning around, now facing Kageyama as he trotted towards him. Meanwhile Asahi stayed where he was, speechless. Gone was the pale, troubled Hinata from a few seconds ago. What he saw now was what seemed like a normal Hinata. But that was the thing, Hinata wasn't normal. Not that it was a bad thing. In fact, it's what made Hinata so great. His smile wasn't as big as usual, but it was still there. His skin only looked kind of pale instead of the ghost he looked like a few seconds ago, and there was no extra spring in his step. Still, the way he managed to switch so easily didn't sit right to him. He looked at the rest of the team. Yamaguchi gave Hinata a puzzled look before turning to Tsukishima, who gave Hinata a quick glare before drawing his attention elsewhere. Tanaka and Nishinoya also gave him some puzzled looks before shifting back to their conversation in a slightly quieter tone while sneaking glances at Hinata. Same with the rest of the team, although some only did it once or twice. The only ones who noticed for sure were Daichi and Shuga. Both of them were looking at Hinata with concern and whispering among themselves. Asahi decided that it would be best if he told them about Hinata. If anyone could help him, it was definitely those two. But for now he needed to focus on training. He would tell them later. Kageyama, why are you staring at me like that? Protested Hinata. I'm not staring. There's just something wrong with your face. It's annoying. He sneered. Looks like Kageyama noticed too. They did their usual fighting, but Hinata didn't really put up much of a fight as he usually did. No, none of my business. Just wait till practice is over and then try to fix it. He told himself. Okay everyone, let's get started. Coach Ukai yelled as he rounded them all up. Okay, let's divide into two teams and play a quick set. Before his eyes landed on Hinata. Hinata, are you feeling okay? Hinata looked down before giving a quick nod. Well, that was concerning. Hinata never misses an opportunity to talk. Coach seemed to be thinking the same thing. You're looking kinda pale. I understand if you want to play, but let me know if you're feeling tired or something. There's nothing wrong with taking a break, got it? Hinata stuttered in agreement, and while the rest of the team didn't say anything, Asahi could sense their concern. The set started and so far everything was going well. Asahi, while still feeling a bit tense on the court, felt great, and the team seemed to be moving much more in sync than before. Well, except Hinata. Asahi had seen him during the past few days always with energy and never really standing still, but now his movements were all sluggish. He took too long to respond to blocks and receives, and while his jump was still anything but impressive, he wasn't able to spike a single toss. Idiot, yelled Kageyama, if you're not going to spike it, then why should I toss to you in? One more. The entire team jumped at hearing Hinata's voice. It didn't sound right. It wasn't his usual overly happy and positive scream, no. This one was raw and broken. It didn't sound like Hinata. One more, whispered Hinata. The words broke as he said them, sounding like a cry for help, and Asahi felt pained by just looking at him. Just what has been going on? Hinata, said Coach Ukai. Hinata looked up at him without a smile. Rest for a bit. Hinata's eyes widened. He opened his mouth to speak, but the coach cut him off. You don't have to tell me what's wrong, but it's clear that you're not feeling well. Sit down for a second, drink some water, we'll discuss this later. The coach left no more room for discussion, and Hinata stood lifeless, before finally making his way towards the bench. The rest of the team continued their game in silence, feeling less in sync. All of them sneaking glances at Hinata, who looked like had his life beeped out of him. Their teacher even tried to start a conversation with Hinata, but it didn't go far. Asahi, someone yelled. Asahi quickly focused back on the game. He ran towards the net and jumped. Shuga had placed the ball just the way he needed it to be. He spiked the ball right through Tanaka's and Kageyama's block. Tsukishima was there to try and receive it, but as soon as the ball hit his arms it bounced violently to the side right, at Hinata. Asahi felt himself go pale. "Hinata!" yelled Nishinoya. Hinata looked up just in time to see the ball inches from his face before it made contact, sending him flying on his back. "Hinata!" The team quickly rushed towards Hinata, except Tsukishima. He just walked there, followed by the adults and their manager. "Hinata, are you okay?" asked Shuga, his hands hovering over Hinata. "He got knocked out." Hinata's face was red from the hit, and while getting knocked out seemed unlikely, he had been quite pale before showing up to practice, so that hit might have affected him more than it should. Everyone was kneeling close to Hinata with worried expressions on their faces. Asahi was one of them as he stared at Hinata feeling guilty, but before he could say anything a firm hand landed on his shoulder. "Asahi, it's okay." It was their coach, taking charge of the situation. "Everyone spread out. Give Hinata some space. Takeda, go get the first aid kit. Kyoko, go find some towels and rinse them in water." Both quickly went to do what they were told, one more professionally than the other. "Wait, he's waking up," said Kageyama. Hinata's eyes fluttered open as he took in his surroundings and tried to get up. "Careful, Hinata, take it easy," Shuga said. He bent down and tried to help him up along with Kageyama. Shuga moved his hand behind Hinata in case he fell again, but the second his fingers brushed Hinata's back it was like a switch was turned. Before anyone could even react, Hinata jumped up and zoomed across the other side of the court. Asahi stood speechless, again, along with the rest of the group. Hinata's speed would never cease to amaze them. His eyes darted left and right as his breath quickened. The panic in his eyes was seen by everyone. "Hinata, calm down," said Daichi. "You just got knocked out. Take it nice and slow." He kept his hand in sight for Hinata to see as he stood up. "What?" Hinata whispered. His panic seemed to only get worse. Kageyama took a step toward Hinata, attempting to calm him down. "Hinata, let's." Hinata flinched as he took a step back and held a hand over his chest in a tight fist, clutching his shirt. If there was a time to worry even more, this was the time. Clearly there was something going on with Hinata, and judging by his reaction, Asahi can only imagine what kind of things they could be. Hinata's eyes cleared as he realized what he did, looking around and trying to control his breathing. It took him about a minute that seemed way too long before he looked down at the floor and simply said, "I should go." "What?" they all collectively exclaimed, but Hinata was already walking towards his too big black hoodie, ready to leave. "Hinata, you're in no condition to leave," Coach Ukai protested, but that only made Hinata walk faster. "Hinata," started Kageyama. Hinata was already heading towards the door and towards Tsukishima, who was leaning next to it. Tsukishima gave him a tired look before talking. "Hey, don't start thinking you're unstoppable, you little." He placed his hand on Hinata's shoulder, and although this time he didn't run, his whole body flinched violently as he trembled under Tsukishima's confused gaze. Tsukishima quickly removed his hand with a face showing both surprise and concern even, but before anyone could say anything they heard their teacher's footsteps. "I found the kit." Takeda waved the small box around as he jogged towards them, followed by a silent Kyoko with damp towels in her hands. "Everything's fine, we just... Wait, where's Hinata?" Asahi quickly whipped his head back towards the door, but the door was wide open with no Hinata in sight. "Hinata." Shuga was the first to call out his name and the first to react as he dashed outside, followed closely by Kageyama. Asahi went behind them along with some other members, but Hinata was nowhere to be found. He had vanished like a crow in the night. Chapter text. Hinata messed up, but then again I didn't take a genius to notice. The second the team stopped looking at him he ran outside without them noticing and hasn't stopped since. He got too attached, too close, and now they knew that he was hiding something. He couldn't let them figure out the truth. That their whole world is so different than what they think it is. So different from the world Hinata knows, and definitely less cruel. They were all amazing people. Breaking this sick illusion they have would just lead them to more danger. Hinata just being there, with them, puts them in danger. Hinata kept running. Through stores, apartments, fields, he didn't care, he just kept running. But he was still human, and eventually he got tired. He fell on his knees as fat tears rolled down his face and onto the ground. He looked up. He didn't recognize where he was, but it was definitely closer towards the city if the tall buildings gave any sign of it. His eyes landed on an alley a few feet away from where he was. It was by no means clean or convenient, but the last thing Hinata wanted was to be seen. The alley was dark and smelly, and other than a stray cat that ran away as soon as Hinata walked in, it was mostly deserted. There was a fire escape that led to the ceiling, and Hinata felt a bit of comfort in knowing that he could go up and see the view. He walked towards it and was about to grab the railing when he suddenly stopped himself. The shutter on his back still there. Hinata didn't want to think about it, so instead he settled himself next to the dumpsters. The night was quiet except for a few cars that drove across the streets. Hinata couldn't see them, but his mind kept picturing police cars. He hugged his knees tight and buried his face in his chest, trying to make himself smaller than he already was. He had done this before. When he was younger and he missed his dad, still did, but started doing it more often after the war broke out. After revealing himself as the son of the pro-hero Hawks, both the public and the government had multiple thoughts on Hinata. The pressure and having to experience the chaos of war at such a young age got to him. Just like tonight, he would curl himself up with a volleyball near his chest and use his wings to hide himself like a cocoon. Except right now he didn't have a volleyball, or his wings. Hinata was alone. And so he cried. He cried by himself, knowing there was no one who could comfort him or understand his pain in this place. Eventually his sobs quieted down and his breathing became more steady. He leaned towards the side, his head thumping the dumpster, now realizing how tired he was, and against his better judgment he closed his eyes and fell asleep. "What?" yelled Tanaka. "Shish," hissed Shuga, trying to get him to shut up. But he wasn't having any of it. Tanaka had been making his way to the bathroom in the middle of the night, not being able to sleep due to some recent events. He found both Daichi and Shuga near the sink discussing something, and Tanaka quickly saw this as an opportunity to ask if they knew anything about Hinata. Both of them seemed hesitant to answer, but before he could push any further the door opened again to show both Nishinoya and Asahi. Just like him, they asked if they had any news on Hinata. Daichi and Shuga still looked rather hesitant in sharing whatever they knew, but they finally broke when all the first years showed up a few seconds later and started asking questions. Except for Tsukishima, he didn't ask anything but still stayed. "Don't shush me," yelled Tanaka, now in a lower tone. "You mean to tell us that you have known something's been wrong with Hinata for almost a week and didn't think to tell us?" "We didn't know for sure," said Daichi, trying to calm him down. "That doesn't matter," added Nishinoya, backing him up. "You should have told us, we could have helped. Hinata's our friend too." "Which is exactly why we didn't tell you," yelled Daichi. He lost his cool for only a second, but it was enough for the group to quiet down and listen. He took a deep breath before speaking again. "You all saw Hinata, right?" he said, looking at all of them. "Whatever he has going on, he clearly doesn't want us to know. Our best guess," he gestured to himself and Shuga, "is that he has been hiding this issue for a while, and what we saw recently was him reaching his breaking point." Tanaka felt his stomach drop. Breaking point. Hinata. He should have noticed something was going on with Hinata. He told him he could trust him. Tanaka-senpai. Yeah, right. He felt ashamed. How dare he call himself that when Hinata was struggling and he was too busy thinking of himself. "I saw him earlier," whispered Asahi. All eyes immediately went to him. Asahi slightly flinched at everyone's gaze but continued talking. "Before practice I found him here." He gestured to the restrooms. "He looked really pale and not like himself. We walked together back to the gym and it only seemed to get worse. But right before he entered the gym, he managed to switch up to a completely different mood. It seemed wrong." He let that last bit settle in, and Tanaka could sense the way everyone, including him, got even more worried. "Was there anything that stood out from your walk with Hinata?" asked Daichi. He didn't make eye contact with anyone, just crossed his arms with his head down and eyes closed, thinking. Asahi took a deep breath before answering. "Actually, before going inside the gym I asked him if he was okay and if he would like that we called his dad. But the moment I mentioned his dad, Hinata, he instantly froze." Shuga immediately let out a stressed sigh and started pacing around, bringing his hands to his face. What does this mean?" asked Kageyama, looking between the two third years. Shuga looked at Daichi as if asking for permission or advice. Daichi opened his mouth but no words came out, as if debating on an option, but it wasn't a no, so Shuga turned back to the rest of the group. For a while we have been thinking that Hinata most likely ran away from his family, he said. Tanaka immediately opened his mouth to ask a question, but Shuga lifted his hand, stopping him. We don't know anything for sure, but judging from Hinata's reaction every time we mention his dad and the way he trembles or flinches often, our guess is that maybe Hinata's dad may not be the kindest person. So that's what we're leaning into, stuttered Yamaguchi. I mean, I suspected something was going on with Hinata, but I never thought it would be something like this. I know it's a lot, but remember, we still don't know for sure, explained Shuga. Either way, we should still look for him. Earlier Daichi and I heard Coach Ukaya on the phone with the police. If the police get involved, it might be harder for us to find Hinata. Shouldn't we just leave it then? Blurted out Tsukishima. Tanaka wiped his face towards Tsukishima along with the rest of the group. He couldn't help but be angry at hearing what Tsukishima suggested they do. The police are the professionals, we should just let them do their job, he said simply. Didn't you just hear what they said? He told him. Hinata is terrified of cops. If what they told us is true, then the cops will most likely just take Hinata back to his dad. He glared at Tsukishima, and he has been told he's really good at it. It didn't matter how tall Tsukishima was, he was going to defend Hinata. Maybe that's not a bad thing, said Tsukishima. The way he said it made it sound like it was obvious as he looked down on everyone. Tanaka really didn't like it. What are you saying? Asked Nishinoya, standing next to him, matching his glare. Tsukishima nodded his head towards Daichi and Shuga. You heard what they said. Hinata has a police radio that he most likely stole, and last time I checked that's illegal. So you're saying Hinata's a criminal? Said Kageyama calmly while somehow still making it sound like a threat. All I'm saying, answered Tsukishima, turning to face Kageyama, is that he might not be running away from someone, but rather running away because he did something wrong. That last statement hung over the entire group, leaving them all silent. Tanaka wanted to deny it, to tell Tsukishima that Hinata couldn't have done anything like that, but then again, what did he know about Hinata? What did any of them know about Hinata? The guy had secrets. It's getting late, said Tsukishima, heading towards the door. Do whatever you want, but I still think you should all just leave it to the authorities. With that, both him and Yamaguchi left the restroom and the now quiet group with too many thoughts in their mind. It is really late, said Asahi, breaking the silence. Shuga sighed. You're right, we have a game tomorrow, we'll talk tomorrow. One by one they all left the restroom and started heading towards bed. But Tanaka had one more thing he needed to do. He silently led both Daichi and Shuga further back and waited until the rest were out of sight. What's wrong, Tanaka? Asked Daichi. Tanaka immediately straightened up. If you find out or hear anything about Hinata, please let me know, I want to help, he said. Shuga opened his mouth to say something, but Tanaka cut him off. He needed to finish his statement. I understand why you didn't trust me in the first place, but I promised Hinata I was going to be the best senpai he's ever had. And I intend to keep that promise. No matter what. He looked them in the eye and raised his chin up, waiting for an answer. Daichi huffed a small laugh that shifted to a small smile and gave him one single nod. But that was all he needed. With no words exchanged, they made their way back to the others to get some sleep. Although he doubted any of them actually slept. Hinata's eyes slightly opened as he woke up from his nap. He was definitely tired, but his back was not in the best position for sleeping. He tried to move around and find a better position when his nose picked up a disgusting smell. His eyes immediately shot open as quickly got on his feet in a crouched position, all thought of sleep gone, ready for any sign of danger. It was a habit. Memories from last night flashed through his brain and Hinata remembered why he was here and not in the motel. Now that the adrenaline was slowly leaving his body, Hinata realized just how tired he was. Last night had been rough, or well, he should say tonight, since it was still dark outside. Hinata brought his hands to his face and through his hair. He ran away from Karasuno and now he knew he couldn't go back. The thought made him want to cry again, but he refused to allow it. He quickly got up, ignoring the way it made his head spin, and rubbed his teary eyes before any tears could fall. It was time for him to get his act together. The whole reason he got trapped in the dome in the first place is because he couldn't do his job right. And he only made it worse by taking advantage of some amazing people just so he could feel what? Normal, like a kid. He felt the tears coming, but they were different this time. Hinata willingly went to the HSPC. He chose to follow his dad. He walked inside the cage and let them take the key. He has no right to complain. The tears started falling down his face. Hot and heavy. He needed to see the bigger picture. It didn't matter what he wanted. People were counting on him to do his job right. To save their lives. To be the hero they needed him to be. He needed to stop being so selfish. Stop it, he yelled. He ran up and down the alley as fast as he could, and on his way back he kicked a metal trash can, sending it flying across the floor. Hinata stood there breathing heavily. He wanted to do it again. To burn all this energy and run and shout and kick 10, 20 more times until he was sick of it. But instead he pulled up his hood and walked out of the alley into the empty street. He needed to get back to the motel and get his notebook and that radio. He had a job to do and he couldn't do it if he stayed here. He was a hero after all, whether he liked it or not. Chapter text. It was kind of embarrassing for Hinata to admit that he didn't know the way back to his motel. In fact, he didn't even know where he was right now. He had been too focused on running away from the gym and Karasuno that he didn't even know where he ran off to. Right now his mind was in a weird state of autopilot. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he had to go somewhere. So his body just kept moving, taking turns when he felt like he needed to, stopping before crossing the road, and more walking. At one point he walked by an abandoned building and he was instantly reminded of his own hideout. He had a lot of memories there, and fortunately most of them weren't spent alone, thanks to a very grumpy underground hero. He let out a tired hum as he remembered his first mission with pro hero Eraserhead. Hinata had barely turned 15 when he was assigned to perform a stealth mission with the hero. Now, by that point he had already done a fair number of successful missions, but it was probably the fact that this was his first time doing a team-up with someone, and that someone being a well-respected hero such as Eraserhead, that made him nervous. Which in turn led to him getting lost in the vents and blowing their cover. Thankfully everything turned out okay and all the Humarise followers were apprehended. Of course that didn't stop Eraserhead from giving him an earful on his poor display of stealth. It would have been a good day if the HSPC hadn't shown up. Their critic was short, quick, and merciless, and it cut through him like a knife. He just knew that when he got back he would face gruesome training. Don't be so hard on the kid, he's fully aware of his mistakes. Hinata turned towards the rough and tired voice and found Eraserhead lazily walking towards them. His breath quickened. He had no idea why Eraserhead was defending him, not to mention in a casual matter, in front of the HSPC. These people may not have control over his entire life like they did with Hinata, but they had full control of his work life. They could ruin him. "Excuse me," replied the head of the HSPC, a middle-aged lady with blonde hair and a permanent scowl on her face. "He messed up," he said, stopping right next to Hinata. "But even pro heroes do that. And besides, he's just a kid." That last word was said much more firmly than the rest, and although he had been too scared at the moment to notice, Hinata had felt somewhat safer. "Eraserhead, this is a personal matter of HSPC, or do I need to remind you exactly who gave you your license?" said the head lady, and Hinata felt the weight of authority behind each word. It scared him. "And do I need to remind you of all the help I have provided since before this war broke loose?" The reply was equally as cold, and Hinata found himself in between a stare down. "I should say something," he thought. "Crow." Hinata slightly flinched at the sound of his hero name. He looked up at the head lady. She wore a small smile on her face. He hated that smile. That smile that promised him many things and yet always held them out of reach, taunting him. "You know better than others that the heroes in our system are rewarded with as much freedom as they wish. Such as your father." Hinata clenched his teeth as she spewed more lies. It wouldn't be the first time she dragged his dad into a conversation to keep him in line. You are welcome to do as you wish for the time being, but are needed back at headquarters by next week to discuss our next attack. And with that she turned and left while Hinata stood there feeling helpless. It didn't matter how much they extended the leash, how much they feigned freedom, in the end the leash would always reel him back so he could follow their orders like birds flying back to their sealed-tight cage. You okay, kid? Hinata got startled out of his thoughts by the gruff voice and turned to see Eraserhead still standing next to him. Oh yeah, just thinking really. Got lost in thought, he said with a smile. He noticed something flash through the hero's eyes as he slowly opened his mouth to say something. Hinata quickly expanded his wings, cutting off whatever the hero was going to say with a gush of wind. Well, I should probably head out, he said quickly, already taking a few steps back. Need to get my rest before my next mission, bye. With that Hinata flew up into the clouds making his escape and only looked back once to see the pro hero. It took Hinata almost 2 hours to get from the mission's location to his hideout. By the time he started entering Hong Kong, or what was left of it at least, he was already considering whether he should just lay on the crumbled-up street and pass out. Shortly after Humarise's attack on Tokyo, Japan went into a state of panic. It only got worse when Humarise started attacking and conquering the country by force. The HSPC was left with no other choice but to evacuate along with as many survivors as possible to China, that by that point was completely isolated. And although no one said anything, it was very clear that Humarise was behind it. It was near the outskirts of the city of Hong Kong that the HSPC decided to make their base, along with many underground bunkers that scattered across the country with the remaining survivors. Almost everyone avoided the abandoned cities altogether, seeing it as a reminder of what they were up against, and yet it was in the ruins of Hong Kong that Hinata found Confor. He gently landed on one of the sturdier buildings of the city where he had his hideout and quickly stretched his sore wings. Calling his hideout a hideout was a bit of a stretch considering it was built from random objects he found laying around. The floor was just a bunch of cardboard and the walls were made out of chairs, wooden planks and other random stuff. The ceiling was an ugly mix of dirty blankets that did not match and even worked as makeshift curtains for all the holes in the walls and for the entrance. He marched up and threw the curtain open, stepping inside. The interior, while spacious, was mostly empty. But that didn't really matter to him. Instead he headed towards the center where there laid an odd bundle covered by a fuzzy yellow blanket. He lifted the blanket up to greet his giant purple bean bag. On top laid his most precious belongings. One was an adorable Endeavor plushie that his dad gave him, and the other was a very run-down volleyball. Hinata hopped into the bean bag, getting comfy with his 2 favorite items, and snuggled himself under the yellow blanket. He let out one last yawn before closing his eyes and falling asleep. The next morning Hinata woke up in a completely different position with half of the blanket on the ground and an empty stomach. He ungracefully rolled onto the floor before finally getting up. His stomach was making a lot of noise demanding food, but all he had that was edible was 3 cans of soda that he was pretty sure were empty and a crunched-up bag of chips. Coming to the dreadful realization that he would have to go look for food, Hinata did a quick stretch before heading towards the exit. He slowly moved the blanket out the way when, "You should eat up." Without even having to use his wings, Hinata jumped almost 3 feet into the air and quickly summoned 2 sharp feathers as dual knives, ready for a fight. But what he found instead was Eraserhead, outside of his hideout, looking at him with a bored expression while holding 2 cups of instant noodles. Hinata just stood there as he tried to make sense of the weird situation with the very tired pro hero. Eraserhead, still looking unfazed, sat down and simply laid the cup on the floor in front of Hinata. "Instant noodle probably isn't the best breakfast, but it's all I had, so you better eat up." Aye, Hinata stammered. This wasn't at all how he expected this morning to go, but Eraserhead wasn't even looking at him, instead staring off into the remains of the city. So without any better idea on what to do, he wielded his feathers back to his wings and sat down in a curled-up position. He gently reached for the cup and held it close. He had forgotten how cold it was and the cup felt nice as it warmed his hands. "Here." Hinata flinched at the voice and turned to find Eraserhead handing him a pair of wooden chopsticks. "How else are you going to eat your food?" It took him a second to compose himself before he reached for the chopsticks. And it was at that moment that his stomach decided to make the most embarrassing noises possible. Hinata's face instantly flushed red as he quickly split the chopsticks and stuffed his mouth with noodles, ignoring the way it burned his tongue. "If you don't mind me asking," spoke Eraserhead, taking out his own chopsticks and eating his noodles. "Why here? Most people tend to avoid the cities." "It's because people avoid it that I like it here," he thought, but he couldn't say that. Couldn't say outright that he was selfish and didn't want to help people or do his job. So instead he said, "I like the quiet, I guess." Eraserhead hummed in agreement and went back to eating his noodles. The silence stretched for a few more seconds before Hinata finally decided to break it by getting to the main point. "Aren't you going to ask why?" he blurted out. Eraserhead just turned towards him, expression still bored. "You know, since I could stay in the HSPC base like all the other heroes who work there." Eraserhead for his part finished chewing his noodles before giving his answer. "Working for the HSPC is stressful on its own. You're barely a teenager, so I won't judge you for wanting some freedom, problem child." Hinata was taken aback by the hero's statement before his brain caught on to the last part. "Problem child?" he asked. "Don't ask," said the hero. "It's just a way I call certain kids who can't stay out of trouble and have a lot of issues. I had a class full of them before the war broke loose." He turned to him and tilted his head, covering his mouth. "You remind me of them." "Class 1A, Hinata said, already feeling 10 times more relaxed. "Yeah, the last class 1 taught. They are good kids." "Well, I guess they aren't kids anymore." The last bit was so quiet Hinata was almost sure he had imagined it. "Eraserhead, if you don't mind me asking, what are you doing here?" he asked. "Like I said, problem child," he said, pointing at him. "I suspected you were going to have some living issues, but I didn't expect your place to look like it was built by a toddler." Ouch. Harsh, Hinata thought. "Come on." The hero got up and started walking away, signaling him to follow. "You're in desperate need of an upgrade." Eraserhead. Hinata quickly scrambled to his feet to follow the hero. "We're in an abandoned city," he said, the bored tone he's had since the beginning of the conversation never leaving. "I'm pretty sure we can find some stuff to make your living space actually look sturdy." "Eraserhead, I don't think that's necessary. You also need food," interrupted the hero, ignoring Hinata's protests. "Can't have you starving yourself." "No, I'm serious, Eraserhead, there's no." "Aizawa," said Eraserhead, stopping and turning towards Hinata. "What?" he asked, barely stopping himself from crashing into the hero. "You said it yourself, kid," clarified Eraserhead. "It's quiet up here, so there's no need for formalities." Hinata stared at Eraserhead, the cold wind picking up as it flew through the city. If he had a different history, or if he had been normal, Hinata would have been thrilled to have the opportunity to call someone by their name instead of their made-up one. It had been years since he last called someone by their given name, someone close, and it had been even longer since he last heard his name being said by someone who wasn't his dad. His dead name. But hearing Eraserhead, he didn't feel happy, he felt raw. Because what the hero was offering him he couldn't give back. "Eraserhead, sir, I'm sorry, but I won't call you that," he said, bowing down to avoid looking at the hero. "While I appreciate the gesture, I don't have any other name other than Crow, so it wouldn't be fair for me to call you by your given name since I can't give you mine." Hinata didn't look up and the silence stretched for a couple of more seconds before finally the hero spoke up. "Okay." Hinata looked up, confusion visible on his face. You don't have to explain anything to me, kid," he said. "It's clear you're not comfortable, so I won't pressure you. But if it's all right with you, you can call me Eraser, you know, to avoid the mouthful." Hinata straightened up and after a quick second to think about it he gave the hero an exciting nod along with a bright smile. They spent the rest of the day upgrading his hideout and he had to admit the finishing product did look 10 times better and sturdier than before. And at the end of the day, Eraser left him to his own privacy to enjoy his new hideout. But that wasn't the end of it. As the days passed, Eraser would come visit him, enough for Hinata to not feel lonely while still respecting his privacy. Sometimes he would even bring his friends Present Mike and Ms. Midnight, who doted on him a lot. Eventually he even got to meet the infamous Class 1A. It was moments like that that made Hinata's day a whole lot better. And on the rare occasions that his dad came, that was all they talked about, other than volleyball of course. Present Mike was there to remind him to eat healthy, Ms. Midnight was there to help him through his nightmares, and Eraser was there when he found him crying for missing his dad. He hadn't seen or heard from his dad in over a month and he couldn't do anything about it. Eraser listened to his cries for hours, and once he was finally done he grabbed Hinata by the shoulders and told him that he was going to make sure that he saw his dad again. The next day Hinata was sent on another mission, and the day after that he got himself trapped inside the dome. Hinata's mind quickly threw him back to the present and he realized he had a few tears on his face. He let out a low sigh. He hadn't realized how much he missed everything. He slowed his walking for a second and looked up. The sky still had no stars, but that wasn't on his mind at the moment. Hinata Shoyo, he thought. He never thought he was ever going to use that name again. But when Daichi asked him for his name, his mind quickly went back to when he was a kid, before he was Crow, so he answered without thinking and gave them his dead name. The name his mom chose for him. Although it wasn't dead anymore. Sure, he didn't use that name for long, but it meant something now. Maybe when he gets back he could tell Eraser. The idea of seeing the hero call him something other than his hero name felt weird, but it also made Hinata smile. It was probably because of all those mixed emotions that Hinata failed to notice the guy who was about to attack him. Chapter text. The first thing Hinata did was dodge the gloved hand that was coming for his face. The second thing he did was mentally curse himself for not noticing said hand sooner. He took a quick jump back to create some distance between his attacker and get a good look at them. The person in front of him was tall and had dark clothing along with dark leather gloves and a black medical mask. His attacker quickly readjusted his footing and dashed towards Hinata. Hinata took a quick second to make sure his hood was still up before taking on a fighting stance. Even though the guy was pretty quick, Hinata was still able to see the way his fist went back, aiming for a punch at the face. A part of him saw it coming. Hinata has fought many villains and he has seen that move on multiple occasions. Quickly he crouched down and blocked the blow, and using the guy's momentum Hinata used his fist to punch him straight in the gut. He heard a few painful coughs from the guy but didn't think much of it, he was just defending himself. That's when Hinata's eyes caught a shiny object on his attacker's hand. He brought it over his head and down towards Hinata. Knife, not good, he thought. He quickly jumped back avoiding the blow, but the guy just let out an angry scream and ran towards him again. Hinata swiftly dodged a swing towards the neck as the guy kept getting closer. He was going for the kill. He blocked a blow to his side and held a tight grip on the man's hand, quickly twisting it to his back. The man let out a painful grunt before dropping the knife, but he didn't stop there. By the time Hinata saw the guy raise his elbow, he felt the hard blow land above his eye. In that split second of a headache, his attacker managed to get a hold of Hinata's hood and his hair and pulled it hard. Whoever Hinata was fighting wasn't afraid to fight dirty. The guy used his weight and strength to push Hinata down and raised his fist. The first blow came painfully at Hinata's ribs. He quickly lifted his hands, gripping the guy's hold on his head as he felt a second punch. He coughed at the pain but didn't think much of it. He needed to get out of this position. Ignoring the pain on his skull, Hinata quickly pulled himself back as he slipped off the hoodie and lost a couple of his ginger hair in the process. Feeling the sudden weight shift, his attacker stumbled back as his hoodie clouded his vision. Knowing that this was the perfect time to strike, Hinata dashed forward and punched the guy through the hoodie and straight on the face, feeling and hearing a gory crunch. Refusing to think if he broke the guy's nose, which he probably did, Hinata quickly jumped up and delivered a flying kick on the man's head, sending him flying straight into some trash cans. Hinata readjusted his footing, wincing at the loud sound of the impact, and quickly readied himself for more, only for nothing to happen. The guy was knocked out cold. He still waited a couple of more seconds before he let his breathing relax, if only a little. He brought his hands to his face and through his hair as he recalled what just happened. His eyes caught on the knife in the middle of the alley. This wasn't just a random mugging, he thought. Someone wants me dead. His eyes went back to the body laying among the trash cans. He was still breathing and Hinata wanted some answers. But before he could even take a step forward he was interrupted by a noise. His body instantly tensed. He turned his head around searching for the source. It wasn't until a few seconds later that the noise came again, a bark, followed by a voice. And it was getting closer. Without much time to think, Hinata quickly dived behind a garbage bin as the barking continued. Making sure to keep himself lowered, Hinata risked taking a peek behind his hiding spot. The noise didn't seem threatening, it sounded normal. Sure enough, a dog walked by the alley followed by a woman on the phone as she walked her dog. The woman didn't even look his way, too busy on her phone call. What is she doing walking her dog in the middle of the night? He thought. He took a quick glance up and his eyes widened as he got his answer. The usual dark night was slowly fading into a deep blue, meaning morning was coming. Hinata heard the sound of a car engine nearby and even heard a vague conversation through one of the windows above him. The town was waking up. He heard a wince from the guy he had just kicked as he saw him barely move. He was waking up. Hinata wanted to march up to him, grab him by the collar of his shirt and demand some answers, but he couldn't. The town was waking up and he needed to get away from the area before anyone saw him. He took one last look at the guy before turning around and doing what he had been doing for so long. He ran. The street was quiet, some might even say creepy. This early in the morning the only sound that could be heard was the almost silent push of buttons that came out of Kenma's video game. Kenma was never a morning person, but he had a match in an hour or two and he really wanted to pass this level before that. That was the only reason why he was up before the sun even came out. Kuru would probably scold him for sacrificing his sleep for his game, but he was doing the exact same thing with his morning runs. Hypocrite, he thought. Through his earbuds Kenma heard the catchy melody of victory as he finally defeated the boss. He took his earbuds off, cutting the music as he turned to look where his friend had gone off to. Their match started at early sunrise, so he should be here any minute. Kenma hummed to himself, a bit caught off guard by his sudden thought. He can't remember if there was ever a time where he was excited for a match, mostly he just hated getting tired. But he had a feeling that his sudden interest was because of who he was going up against. Normally he would have been deeply annoyed if someone were to interrupt him while he's playing his games, but with Hinata it was different. He didn't know why, but maybe it had to do with the fact that Hinata reminded him of Kuru when they were kids. And besides, there was just something about him that caught Kenma's attention. He wasn't sure why, but he had to admit, Hinata was rather interesting. Kenma was about to continue with his game, but his peace was distributed by the sound of footsteps getting closer. He let out a sigh. Looks like Kuru's back, he thought. He kept his eyes on the screen and tried to sink into the bench, but as the steps grew louder he noticed something. Kenma has seen Kuru run more times than he could count and he always kept an even pace, but these steps didn't sound like Kuru, they were frantic and fast. Letting curiosity get the better of him, Kenma placed his game down and leaned forward trying to see around the corner of the street. Not even a second later the source of the noise turned the corner, and it wasn't Kuru. Hinata, Kenma asked, shocked to find him. Oh, Kenma, Hinata replied, slowing his run to a complete stop. Kenma had to make sure he was looking at the first year clearly and that it wasn't the lack of light that made Hinata look like that, but after a quick second he realized he wasn't imagining things. Hinata, what happened? He said more to himself than to Hinata. Hinata looked like a mess. First of all, he was panting heavily as if he had been running for a while with sweat near the corners of his face. Secondly, his supposedly white shirt was now covered in dirt, making it look more gray than white, and on top of it all, he had a bleeding cut over his left eyebrow. What, Kenma? Hinata asked again, looking rather dazed. You're hurt, he pointed out, getting closer towards him. What? Asked Hinata. He immediately started patting himself down, checking for injuries. Kenma slowly lifted his hand up and pointed at his forehead. He noticed Hinata slightly flinch as his hand got closer as he quickly turned his back, touching his forehead. Ow, he winced. Kenma immediately walked closer, standing next to him as Hinata stared at his palm that was now slightly covered in red. Hinata, he said sternly, making sure his friend was looking at him. What happened? Hinata appeared momentarily stunned. He opened his mouth but no words came and he looked down seeming distraught. Kenma was about to ask again but was rudely interrupted by someone else. Oi, what's happening here? Kenma didn't even have to turn to know that the person that interrupted them was none other than his childhood friend and significant annoyance. Kuru stopped a few steps near the duo and gave Hinata a once-over. What happened to you? So let me get this straight, said Yamamoto. You, a member of the Karasuno team judging by your shirt, went out for an early run, got lost, got mugged, got hurt and escaped. Yes, that's pretty much it, replied Hinata. Well, it looks like you had quite the adventure, commented Yaku. Now hold still, you need bandages on that cut. Kenma watched Hinata try to dismiss Yaku only for him to grab Hinata's face between his hands so he could apply the band-aids above his eyebrow. There, said Yaku, satisfied with his work. You're all better, though I have to admit that I'm a little shocked. This area doesn't seem like the type to have people mugging high schoolers. Hinata let out an embarrassed laugh and looked outside the window while answering. Yeah, well I kinda got lost in my own head and didn't really pay attention to where I was going, so I can't say for sure. Yeah, but are you okay? Asked Yamamoto. You were bleeding when Kenma and Kuru brought you here. He tapped his own forehead where Hinata had the cut. Hinata's hand quickly went towards his now bandaged forehead. Don't worry, it's nothing I can't handle. He stuttered. But, is there a restroom I can go to? Yaku finished organizing the first aid kit and led Hinata towards the hall. He pointed towards the end of the hall and with a quick thank you, Hinata was out of the room. Coming back into the room, Yaku sat down with the rest of the team as an awkward silence followed. A silence that Inuka generously interrupted. I like him. Yeah, he's kinda hard to not like, commented Yaku. Even Kenma liked him. Kenma didn't even bother asking why that was important and instead chose to go back to his corner of the room to play his game. But it's still odd though, voiced Yamamoto. Not gonna lie, I'm a little worried for the guy. Of course we should worry, said Yaku like it was obvious. The kid just got mugged and hurt. Yeah, but I agree with Yamamoto, added Inuka. I mean, we aren't exactly near Karasuno and I thought this area was supposed to be more on the quiet and down-to-earth type. It just seems weird. Yaku let out a sigh and Kenma found himself focusing more on the conversation than his game. Well, we can't do much about it, sighed Yaku. And besides, he's lucky he found us. Now all we have to do is take him back with us to Karasuno and play our match. Which reminds me, we're leaving in less than 30 minutes, so start packing. There were a few protests before everyone started packing their bags for their leave, including Kenma. He picked up his jacket and looked towards the door and out the hallway. Hinata still hasn't come back. He took a hesitant step forward and quickly checked back in case anyone saw him, but everyone was too busy packing to notice his internal dilemma. Quickly shaking his head, Kenma silently walked out into the hall and towards the bathroom. What was he doing? He was going to check on Hinata. Why? He didn't really know. Maybe it was because of Yamamoto and Inuka who had voiced his thoughts, because yes, Hinata was odd and it piqued his interests. Not only that, but Kenma had seen him earlier, and he didn't seem okay. He was just going to check on him and ask if he was okay. That's normal, right? Is this how social interactions work? He thought. It's exhausting. After standing in front of the restroom doors for a few seconds while he shuffled on his feet, he finally got the courage to reach out and open the door. Just a little bit. Kenma saw Hinata leaning on the sink with his hands on his face. He slowly shifted them to his forehead and into his hair, somehow making it even more chaotic and spiky. He stayed like that for a few seconds and Kenma contemplated leaving. Hinata seemed to be having a bit of a moment. That's when he noticed Hinata grab something from his pocket. Other than seeing a shiny black, Kenma had no idea what he had on his hand. He saw Hinata place it on his palm as he stared at it tentatively, seeming lost in thought. Wanting to get a better look, Kenma tried to get closer, but unfortunately his knee hit the door, which resulted in an audible creaking noise. Hinata immediately jumped and shoved his fist deep into his pocket, staring frantically at Kenma before calming down. Kenma, he asked. Kenma instantly looked down, not feeling comfortable with eye contact, and let himself in, letting the door close behind him. Just wanted to see if you were okay. He mumbled. He wasn't even sure if he was heard. Oh, yeah, don't worry, I'm fine. Hinata replied, waving his hand in front of him. Kenma noticed his other hand was still in his pocket. Kenma started. He wasn't really sure if he should be asking this, but curiosity got the better of him. What do you have there? He lazily pointed at Hinata's pocket. He noticed how Hinata tensed up at the question. You don't have to tell me, you know. Kenma quietly reassured. It felt weird talking too much. No, Hinata started. It's fine, I guess. Slowly Hinata got his hand out of his pocket and gently lifted the item in front of Kenma to see. Is that a crow feather? He asked. Hinata stared at the feather for a second and twirled it around for a bit. I guess you could say that, yeah. Kenma took a step closer, wanting to take a closer look. He stopped when he noticed Hinata pull the feather towards his chest. Sorry, he said after he realized his action. Well, you could say it has sentimental value. Kenma looked at him for a moment before he gave a short nod, which Hinata returned with a soft smile, followed by a few seconds of silence. Well, I guess you could say you really are one of Karasuno's crows. Kenma told him. Kenma noticed Hinata's face shift to confusion, but before he got a chance to say anything, he was interrupted by someone slamming the door open. Oya. Kenma immediately felt tired, and he didn't even have to turn around to know Karu was behind him. Oh great, you're both here. Saves me the trouble, he said. The coach sent me here to remind you two to get ready, the bus leaves in 20. Oi, and you, Shrimpy. He pointed at Hinata and Kenma saw him tense up at Karu's menacing smile. You're part of the team, right? Nakoma has been practicing and we don't have any intention of holding back, so while this is only a practice match, I'm excited to see what Karasuno brings to the table. Chapter text. Hinata found himself inside a small bus filled with Nakoma players next to Kenma at the very back of the bus. This for some reason seemed to shock the players, and he could have sworn he even saw the third year, Yaku, tear up a bit, for some reason. He even had a brief talk with Nakoma's coach. He was really nice and even asked him if he needed any extra bandages. Hinata politely dismissed him, saying he was okay, still convinced with the thought that he didn't even need bandages in the first place. Besides, he had bigger things to worry about, like the fact that he was on a bus with Nakoma, heading towards Karasuno, the same team he had befriended, lied to, and ditched not even 24 hours ago. Hinata's nerves were spiked to 11. His feet wouldn't stop bouncing and his palms were all clammy and sweaty. At this point Hinata was debating jumping out the window. But while he was sure he could successfully jump off a moving vehicle with no major injuries, he knew there was no possible way for him to do that without drawing attention. Especially with the fact that he gave Kenma the window seat after he noticed the guy struggling to ask for it. So for now he was just left with his many thoughts. There was nothing else he could do. He was heading back to Karasuno and he had no idea how they would react. A part of him knew they must be worried. They were all very kind and amazing people, and that only made everything much more complicated. The second they saw him they would most likely corner him and throw an insane amount of questions at him. Questions he couldn't answer. Not only that, but at least one of them must have called the police, most likely the coach or Takeda-sensei. That only placed an even bigger target on his back than the one he already had. Hinata ran his hands through his hair, feeling more and more overwhelmed. A part of him wished they would just forget about him. That they would just think, what a weird kid, anyway. And go back to whatever they were doing before Hinata stumbled into their lives. They would continue to play volleyball and goof off, and Hinata would fade in the back of their minds. He didn't like that thought, but there was another one that he feared even more. What if they hate me? He thought. While he knew this was highly unlikely, his brain just kept on repeating the question. Maybe they got tired of Hinata leaving them in the dark, of all the vague answers and dumb lies. They always did their best to make him feel more comfortable, to make him feel more safe, like if he was part of the team. But Hinata never opened up, and what if after his terrible exit last night was the last straw for them? They got tired of his game of pretend and threw in the towel. The thought made Hinata's eyes water, but he knew it would probably be the best outcome. That way they could focus on their own lives and Hinata could focus on his mission, being a hero and fulfilling his job as Crow. "Hey, I think we're here," yelled a voice at the front of the bus. Hinata's head jerked up. "Yeah, everyone grab your stuff, we're here," yelled Kuru. The whole Nakoma team started zipping up their bags and standing up as the bus parked near the gym. Hinata took a peek out the window and saw them. Karasuno. Thankfully they didn't see him and Hinata was quick to blend in with the tall people from Nakoma. One by one the team exited the bus and headed towards Karasuno, leaving only him and Kenma behind. "Hinata, you coming?" asked Kenma softly. "Actually you go on ahead," he said. "I got a little car sick and need a minute." Kenma gave him a raised eyebrow. "Wouldn't it be better to be off the bus then? To get some fresh air?" Hinata immediately looked everywhere except at Kenma. "Yeah, but I just want to sit down, I'll be out there in a bit." Kenma looked like he wanted to say something else but instead mumbled a soft okay and exited the bus. Hinata followed him with his eyes until he was a few feet away from the bus and immediately got into action. He struggled a bit with the window but managed to pull it down and initiate his escape. This was one of those rare moments where he was thankful for his short size. He crept out of the bus, opposite to the teams and landed silently on his feet. Crouching down he looked back at the teams from under the bus. He couldn't really tell who was who but he could tell what team they were from thanks to the red and black sweatpants. Keeping his body lowered he made his way to the front of the bus, as far away from the rest as possible. It wouldn't be long before they started looking for him so he had to act fast. Unfortunately for him the bus was in the middle of an empty parking lot with no place to hide. The closest thing that could keep him out of sight was the gym. He had no intention of going inside it, but instead going around the building and away from sight. With the rising sun, he should be able to use the building's shadow to keep himself hidden. But the problem still remained the same: the distance. Even if he ran at full speed he would still be fully exposed in the open parking lot. And no amount of stealth, other than that of pro-hero Invisible Girl, could help him. Finally realizing he had no other option, he risked sneaking a glance at the team. They all appeared to be busy with idle chatter amongst each other, except for Kenma of course. Taking a deep breath Hinata planted his feet on the ground and looked at the building's shadow. Hinata ran as fast as he could while keeping his stance low and breathing quiet. He quickly made it to the side of the gym. He would have kept running but instead stopped dead on his tracks when he realized he wasn't alone. Leaning against the wall stood a tall man wearing a black medical mask and leather gloves. He wasn't wearing as much dark clothing, but Hinata recognized him. After all, it was the same guy that tried to stab him a few hours ago. "Well, this certainly makes things easier," the man said. He slowly lifted his head up towards Hinata. "Here I was thinking of ways to get to you, when it was you who came to me." Hinata looked the man straight in the eye. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to take a fighting stance, but he chose against it. While it may seem unlikely, he wanted to see if he could lie his way out of the situation, or better yet, get some answers. Not only that, but initiating a fight might blow what little cover he had. "I'm sorry sir, can I help you?" he replied, tone even unlike his nerves. The man narrowed his eyes before straightening up and taking a step forward. As a matter of fact, yes. And that's when he noticed that he had something under his arm and Hinata took a shuddering breath. He had left his hoodie at the alley. The man extended said piece of fabric as he continued on his explanation. "You see, not even 5 hours ago I encountered a certain criminal that had to be put to justice." Hinata fought the urge to scoff as the man continued. "Unfortunately he got away, but he left this hoodie at the scene of the crime." The man's eyes locked on Hinata. "Do you notice anything?" He refused to let any emotion show on his face. He was at a disadvantage and he was truly afraid. "Can't say I have," he said. He was somewhat proud that his voice came out even. "And I hope you don't mind me asking, but why exactly are you searching for criminals?" The man huffed a humorless laugh before reaching his back pocket. Hinata tensed up but then realized he only had his wallet in his hand. "I apologize for the confusion." He flipped open his wallet and held it for Hinata to see. "I am Officer Kenzo. I work for the authorities. We met a few days ago during your visit to Aoba Josai." Hinata felt himself go pale and his heart rate spiked at the new information. His mind immediately connected the dots and realized that the scary officer he met at the police station that day was the same man who was in front of him. He messed up and now the authorities were onto him. But if they were, why was he here chatting with an officer? Shouldn't he be arrested, at gunpoint? Unless, it was highly unlikely, but there's the high chance that the officer had acted on his own accord and not by the authorities. That would also explain this whole conversation and the attack. He didn't know if he was right, he just had the suspicion and was waiting for him to slip up anything that he could use against him after his reckless actions. Now that that's cleared up, let me ask again, continued the man officer, as he placed his wallet back in his pocket. Do you notice anything? Hinata wasn't going to give him anything. Like I said before, afraid not. The officer scoffed under his mask before he lifted his hand into the hood of his hoodie. You know, you have a very interesting hair color. Very vibrant and eye-catching. I can't say I know anyone quite like it. He pulled out his hand and in between his fingers held a single lock of orange hair. Hinata's hair. I would like to remind you that it's considered a crime to lie to an officer who seeks to protect his country. So let me ask again, do you notice anything? Hinata looked at the man closely. The way his grip tightened against his hoodie and the way he slightly fidgeted with the strand of hair. He was getting agitated and unsure of himself. Hinata could work with that. I can assure sir I'm not lying. And besides, as I told you that day at the station, I'm barely a high schooler. I doubt I could have escaped a trained professional. Officer Kenzo's eye twitched and Hinata feared he may have gone too far. But before anyone could say anything they were interrupted by a new voice. Hinata. Somehow Hinata's heart stopped deeper into his stomach and he didn't know if he should be grateful or distressed at the person behind him. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.